So there's a popular misconception, I think, because I've had a few friends tell me this, and infinite Reddit guys discussing this, but like people are going around and saying that the temperature of the air heated to the temperature of the surface of the sun as the sub was imploding. And apparently it imploded too fast for that to happen. Like, sure, it could have.
But it didn't actually get there. It's fine, dude.
Instantaneously gone. Yeah. Literally vaporized.
Also, it was a submersible, not a submarine. This is also very important that people understand this distinction.
But Kira, both of those words start with sub.
This is true.
You can't.
Yeah, where's the Dom Marines?
Oh God.
Dommersible.
The questions we all need answering. It's Red Planet. Look at the show. It's happening right here. Welcome, everyone. I'm gonna start off. I'm taking control because
he's a Dom Marine.
I'm a Dom Marine, yeah. I was gonna say that and then think like, oh, it sounds too much like a cringe military thing. Never mind. Anyway,
it's cringe. Don't worry. It's definitely cringe.
It's whatever it is. It's cringe. Sophie, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Jesus, I was hoping I'm last every week, and I was like, I'm gonna have time to think about it. I was gonna go to an organizing meeting today about some important community organizing stuff that I can't talk about because of OPSEC, but like I did not because it was warm and I wanted to sit in the park and write in my book. So that's not very rising transsexual Lenin of me, but maybe next time I will have a more base thing to do. But what about Kira? What was the most base thing you did this week?
Oh, well, thank you for asking, Sophie. Well, as I've been telling y'all a few times, I've been planning this fundraiser with my friend Bellamy, and I want to make this announcement right now. It's July 1st, so less than a week from today. So this upcoming Saturday, we're planning a fundraiser for a Black trans man living in the Deep South. His name's Raul, and he was instrumental in creating tools of detecting and collecting, data on disinformation and tracking the emergence of Gamergate, but hasn't really gotten any of the support or compensation that his white counterparts have. And by the way, it's good that people get compensated for doing research on fascism, right? This is a good thing. But we also want to make sure that our Black trans comrades, especially, our Black trans comrades can also receive support when they're putting themselves out there and doing fuck tons of work that a lot of these tools are still used today. So this Saturday on my channel, twitch.tv/Kira Chats, we will be hosting that fundraiser. We're trying to raise 10K in one day for Raul so that he can get out of the Deep South, which is extremely unsafe for Black trans people, and get him to a safer, relatively safer state in America, and to also allow him to, stop treading water and actually start doing the things that he wants to do. So I'm really excited for that. We're going to have all sorts of amazing guests coming, including lots of your faves like FD Signifier, Jesse Gender, Innuendo Studios, Mexi, lots of wonderful people. So make sure, like tons of people. And we also might be hosting these, we're toying with the idea, and if y'all have any suggestions on topics, let me know. But we're toying with the idea of doing some bullshit debates. Like, not like we're going to make a mockery of like the debate stuff, but like, not debating human rights, but debating garbage. So if you have any garbage topics, something that is infinitely kind of like, there's no right answer, no one's feelings get hurt, but you can have like a lively kind of like squabble over it, please let me know if you have any suggestions. But yeah, that's what we've been planning. And so very excited for that this Saturday on twitch.tv/Kira Chats, and also other channels. We're going to encourage our guests to be simulcasting as well. So yeah, it's always their channels that you could possibly pop into. So, but Mule, my good friend Mule, I want to know what you've been up to, because you're my friend and I love you. What's the most base thing you've done this week?
I love you too. I'm also your friend, and thank you for that. This week, despite being extremely exhausted, and mentally unwell for various reasons other than normal. I went down with the union to one of our funders down in London. Unfortunately, a day so jam-packed that I didn't have time to even tell my sweet London friend Sophie that I was even there. And we wouldn't have had fucking time to meet for a coffee anyway, sadly, because there was just so much going on. We basically, went down there, and I had an awful night's sleep because we got there the night before, and we're staying in the centre of London, and it's very, very loud and very, very hot and just awful. So yeah, we very, very tired mule headed over to it's like a big building. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, one of the funders for GMTU is the Nationwide Foundation, which is very interesting because Nationwide is a building society, ergo a bank that gives people mortgages and buy-to-let mortgages for one, and they have this sort of foundation that's attached to that, where they're like, right, well, we're going to be a grant fund, and we're going to give people all these, like, like millions of pounds to do like awesome activism surrounding housing and stuff like that. So obviously there was a lot of corporate fluff. I don't think I will be jeopardizing the union's funding to say that, but other than that, I think one of the best things from the day was, just like basically meeting other people who have housing at the heart of what they desire to change in the world. And it's very funny because there's definitely like a lot of liberals, like a lot of lib sort of ideas around housing. Like, it was very funny because like some of the organizers of the event were talking about how like that they were doing some deep thinking, and that's literally a quote. They were saying they were doing some deep thinking about how we can change systems, but I don't know how deep that thinking was, because none of them came up with the conclusion of communism and or anarchism. So deep thinking is not what I would call it personally. However, they're trying. So, anyway, it was quite funny actually, because I was speaking to someone in the, what is it called? I was actually speaking to the CEO. I didn't even know it was the CEO of Towns and Councils Planning Authority, whatever that is, whatever that does. I think these are people that actually like, they like give people who are like building these like big developments and stuff like that, the people that we're actively like trying to like stop in some regards, like building these like massive unaffordable, badly developed housing sort of things. I was speaking to her about food empowerment, stuff like this, and she was actually talking about like, oh my god, yeah, it's funny because all the teachers are on strike, and all my friends are talking about how it's awful for the kids, and they need to get off strike, and what are they doing, but at the end of the day they should just pay them more. And I was like, that's not something I ever thought I'd hear come out of the mouth of a CEO. I wonder if she pays her staff more. But anyway, conversation for another day. Like I say, it was a very interesting day, very, very weird, sort of like talking with a lot of establishment people, a lot of liberals, a lot of people like trapped in the mindset of like, we need to appeal to politicians. And, we're just sat there going, no, you don't. You don't have to do that. Like, you could do that to an extent, but it's not the be all and end all. There were some other radical housing activists there though. And what was quite funny was there was someone there from the Citizens Advice Bureau. So Citizens Advice Bureau, if you're not aware, I think, Sophie, you probably correct me on this, but I think it used to be government funded. I think it used to be like in public hands, Citizen Advice Bureau.
I actually don't know the history of it.
No, but well, regardless, now it's kind of not connected. So they get funding from the Nationwide. Maybe it's been partly privatized. I wouldn't be surprised that the Tories privatize everything. But I was speaking to someone from Citizens Advice Bureau who was very, very interested in the kind of activism that like Tenants Union does. And she was going, oh my God, yeah, you guys are on the ground. You're doing all the hard stuff and blah, 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 blah. And I said to her, I was like, funnily enough, a lot of what we do is just going to you guys' website and telling people the advice that's on there. It's like the Citizens Advice Bureau is literally like that. It's like it helps people know their rights and stuff. Obviously, we take that and we turn it into direct action. But like, yeah, a lot of it is just telling people what their rights are in there. So it was quite a funny interaction. But yeah, that was the most base thing I did this week. Tim, What's going on? What did you do? What's happening?
The most base thing that I did this week, I was just talking to Soph about this before the stream, is probably there was a couple books that that our guest today had recommended that we, if we wanted to, we could check out beforehand, might aid the discussion. And one of them in particular that I read was called A Woman's Book of Choices, and it slaps extremely hard. And in the book, it recommends, like make copies of this, send it to people, this kind of stuff. And I did that a lot this week, just sending. It's on the Internet Archive. You can look it up, A Woman's Book of Choices, and it just it slaps extremely hard. It's from the early 90s. It's a book about reproductive health care and kind of so it's kind of inseparable from being like this, like a political manifesto as well as like a home healthcare kind of book. But it's very conscious to say like this is not like a recipe book or instructions to follow, but this is a book of the experiences of women and things that they have done. And we are just reporting on what they have done and explaining it in great detail, providing political and historical context at every step. And it's really amazing. It's just about how various groups over time have kind of like taken their healthcare into their own hands, particularly with a focus on like birth control, like kind of like home abortions and other methods of like pregnancy termination and stuff, and how this was like, this was I think the book came out after Roe versus Wade was passed, but most of the information in it kind of predates that, and they talk about a lot of networks and things that these feminist groups were setting up to make sure that people had access to abortions. And it goes from, the very unsafe stuff through to the more commonly accepted safe stuff, and outlines absolutely everything they were doing, from the actual methods themselves and how they learned them from doctors and herbalists and everything like that, through to like explaining different things, like everything from like the legal side of things, how these women were like protecting themselves from the law, various court cases and everything, through to like things like friendship groups and how they were kind of using these like close networks to protect themselves, to protect the women that were coming to them, and also to protect themselves legally as well. There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff in there.
Reading it, I thought the thing it reminded me of most is like zines that are in print, but I don't think are online, that I've like read bits of, made by trans women, for trans women, talking about like similar organizing and mutual aid structures, and especially DIY HRT.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking when I was reading it. I was thinking about like how similar this is to trans communities doing DIY HRT. It's like very, very similar. The structure of like friendship groups.
Yeah, and structures, exactly. It's like if you're not surprised to find that like a union looks mostly the same between workplaces, it's like like a fight for bodily autonomy looks mostly the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the key thing. One thing that I really liked that they mentioned was there was and it came up in a court case, was that so through this entire process where they were like constantly learning about things, they were it focuses a lot on the menstrual extraction process of birth control. And so they were all learning about this thing, and they were all practicing it on each other, to the point that all of them were very good at this thing, and they would perform it together in groups. So then I think there was a court case that came up where they were like, they needed like, part of it was they needed someone to be the expert for the court case to persecute them in that way, to prosecute them or whatever. But they were able to say like, actually, there was no expert. We were a group of people. Like, there's no one person that is guilty or anything. We are all equally capable, and we weren't performing this under the guidance of one person, but we were performing this collectively, as a group sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really great. Yeah,
exactly,
a lot of it.
Exactly, and totally the same thing. Like, I've heard a lot of people talking about, like, again, to relate it back to queer, like, kind of queer analogy, like, I have heard a lot of people talking about ways that they want to react to, like, I don't know, like Labour being at Pride this year or whatever, just as I've been going around queer spaces, and it's like, because of like Starmer palling around with toughs, and like, it just seems like stuff that is just like popping up from the same, like, just independently, like people arriving at same conclusions. And it because it had me thinking whenever I hear someone saying it, like saying whatever their idea is, I'm like, when inevitably something happens, like, who will they think is guilty? Because literally, like, everyone has had the same idea at the same time. Like,
yeah, and it definitely, I think it definitely makes it a lot harder to prosecute people like that. But also just it is amazing the kind of solidarity that they formed in these groups, and like how they were able to kind of adapt over time and stuff like that, just because because a lot of these groups, they just really, like, they were so tight knit, and they all communicated really well, and they all had really good bonds. So there are various times when groups split off or like rejoined, and some of them went on to found like actual clinics and things after Roe versus Wade went through.
Yeah.
Or some of them even before that, they were, setting up, like they were performing procedures low key under the guise of other things or whatever. And and it's really amazing, really inspiring work. And it is, just really
Conrad's telling us that
really
to be fair, abortion is like the most of the topic today. We're talking about the book.
Okay, cool.
We can just literally like do this in a sec. Okay, we should do some news, and I'm up first. I wanted to just point out something that I saw on Twitter. I know my incredible journalism instinct. Basically, I saw mapping of the Canada wildfire smoke is reaching across the Atlantic now. So it's been detected in Norway, and it's flowing down into southern Europe now. I don't want to mislead people to think, because like the projection, which I think we're seeing now, makes it look kind of like, oh shit, the same things, the big orange sky over New York is now going to be over us. I don't think that's what's going to happen. The article I found says it's talking about like the same particles being detected. But I guess I just wanted to highlight it because like climate events are really big. Look, that's kind of scary, ain't it? They go all the way across the ocean. Okay, that's all.
So next up on the docket, so if our audience is familiar, I'm sure they are, with Tortuguita. Tortuguita is a non-binary indigenous occupier of the forest who was killed by cops. They are defending the forest to try to prevent the building of Cop City, which is proposed like 90 million, which is, by the way, the price tag is going up and up and up, but proposed $90 million 85-acre police training facility to be built on Weelaunee, South River Forest in Atlanta. So just to recap, on the morning of the January 18th, police were executing a raid of the camp, during which a police officer was shot, and body cams reveal later that this was likely by another police officer, upon which police then shot and killed Tortuguita by shooting them at least 57 times. So then police proceeded to lie about this to the press, claiming Tortuguita shot at the police first, and therefore they had to retaliate in self-defense against Tortuguita. However, autopsy shows, and by the way, the autopsy results haven't been fully revealed, but the autopsy shows that Tortuguita had no gunpowder residue present on their body, didn't really have a firearm, although police claim they found one later, which no gunpowder residue, not their weapon, and that they're most likely in a cross-legged seating position with their hands up at the time of the murder. Also, cops lie. So I think we're all pretty certain of what actually happened here. Tortuguita was a nonviolent defender of the forest, trying to prevent the building of a fascist training institution, and fascists being fascists, especially this particular group of fascists. The Atlanta police have been monstrously, like, over the top, cartoonishly fascist. murder Tortuguita and then try to pass it off as, oh, we had to because our jobs are so dangerous. So this yesterday, organizers plan to hold a vigil for Tortuguita, just as it was supposed to be at 8:30 p.m.
Hey, I think it's Tortuguita.
Tortuguita, thank you. Just as the 8:30 p.m. vigil for Tortuguita was set to begin in Brownwood Park, several dozen Atlanta police officers in tactical vests, some of them were masked, swept through the park under the pretext of telling the Stop Cop City protesters that the park closes at 11. So just imagine this, 2.5 hours before a park closes, a whole, like, effectively an army of cops in like tactical gear show up to tell you that in 2.5 hours the park will close. Like, it was very clearly an intimidation effort, right? At the very least, an intimidation effort. Police then finished their walk through the park and returned to their cruisers with organizers at their heels chanting at them to go away. And then the police once they're in their cruisers, began circling the vigil and openly admit to doing this, for the record. So they're just pieces of fucking shit fascists, just absolute, like, hot, steaming garbage fascists with no shame whatsoever for the fact that they murdered Tortuguita. And now when people are trying to mourn the memory of this peaceful forest protector of the forest, who, by the way, frequently would meditate in the cross-legged position. So it's not completely unheard of that Tortuguita at the time was meditating, that now they're trying to harass people that are trying to pay their respects to this person. So Belkis Tehran, I hope I'm not butchering that too much, mother of the slain forest offender Tortuguita, addressed the crowd with words of encouragement, a prayer, and a song after the Atlanta police disrupted the vigil. So at least their mother was able to have at least a moment of paying respects to their child. So fuck cops. Just fuck cops. Just a continually despicable display by the Atlanta police, which doesn't surprise us in the least bit, but it's still disgusting to see. But Tim, can you tell me about what's going on with medical marijuana, the medical marijuana dispensary?
Yeah, so Elkins
Marijuana.
Park.
Whoa.
Yeah, drugs.
Yeah, what is that? I've never heard of that. Anyway, Elkins Park, medical marijuana dispensary workers vote to unionize. So dispensary workers in Elkins Park, an unincorporated community just north of Philadelphia, told their bosses that they wanted to unionize on the biggest marijuana holiday of the year. I love the idea of like marijuana holidays. But so that was April 20th, 420, as the kids say. The company was extremely adverse to the idea of their workers unionizing, said Wendell Young, the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union president for Local 1776. Union organizers said that over the past few months, Restore Integrative Wellness Center, I love the name, Restore Integrative Wellness Center, hired anti-union educators to hold meetings with workers before the vote. I just love that coming from the Restore Integrative Wellness Center, like with the anti-union.
The Restore Integrative Wellness Center is going to hire the Pinkertons.
Exactly, yeah. So workers also said that the company's top management sent an email to employees one day before the vote, pleading with them not to unionize, saying it would destroy the relationship between the employees and the company, which is like, great. Exactly. The union currently represents more than 1,000 cannabis workers across 20 dispensaries in Pennsylvania. And so Restore, which is the short name of the whole thing, utilized a lot of the typical scare tactics and intimidation. Young said they created a hostile work environment. But on June 1st, nearly 69% of workers voted to unionize the Elkins Park store.
You're telling me this story is 69 and 420?
It is very bad.
Unbelievable.
So they voted blah, blah, blah. Out of 16 ballots cast, 11 were in favor of the union and 5 voted against it. There were 24 employees eligible to vote, records show. So 16 out of 24 employees and 11 were in favor. So this isn't the first cannabis dispensary across the region to unionize, and union leaders say it won't be the last either. so especially as the industry is poised to grow in the coming year. So there's another story in Philadelphia about LGBTQ employees at a dispensary unionizing, alleging workplace discrimination. So yeah, cool. So the union president, Wendell Young, said the total compensation for unionized cannabis workers is typically about 30% higher than non-unionized workers when healthcare benefits and retirement plans are factored in. Dispensary workers at Restore are expected to cross-train as janitors, security officers, inventory specialists, and retail sales cashiers for a starting wage of $17 an hour, but are often denied overtime and holiday pay, employees say. There are no sales bonuses either. Lindsay Elston is 31 years old and has a college degree and says she can't afford to give the company more of her time. They keep you at a wage where they can say that it's the highest of the industry, she said, but like I had told management, industry standard doesn't mean that it's a livable wage. There we go. So yeah, obviously the logic there is that the union workers bring up their wage, and then often the company kind of either has to compete by offering their non-union workers a little bit higher as well, or those non-union workers will just, they just join the union, makes the union stronger. And obviously if that happens a lot, then it brings it up over the entire industry. Like unions are generally a net positive for the entire industry as opposed to just the union workers. So so hopefully they push that through, and yeah, and then things get better for everyone. But Mule, what's happening over there in Russia? What's going on?
So this is a big news story, and we got a lot of news. So I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as possible. But basically, a mercenary firm called the Wagner Group attempted a coup against Vladimir Putin and Russia at large this week, late this week. It was met by a payoff. But the details are as follows. Earlier this week, mercenaries from the Wagner Group and their leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who've been fighting for Russia in their invasion of Ukraine, attempted a resistance to the invasion in retaliation to a Russian missile strike hitting close to a camp that they were in charge of in occupied Ukraine. Prigozhin basically declared war on Russia's Ministry of Defense. Popular Front on Twitter reported that footage had emerged claiming to show that the Wagner Group mercenaries were taking positions outside of Russian Ministry of Defense buildings in Rostov. The mercenaries appeared to have faced relatively little resistance in their assault on the local Ministry of Defense headquarters. Vladimir Putin had to, get involved and say something, as you would expect. And, just standard platitudes of condemning the Wagner Group's mutiny against the Russian Ministry of Defense, calling Prigozhin a traitor and all this stuff. But then footage emerged on Popular Front's Instagram and Twitter showing that the Wagner Group head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was talking to Deputy Defense Minister Yunusbek Yevkrov in Rostov, where Prigozhin basically threatens to both blockade Rostov and move towards Moscow as they talk at the local Russian Ministry of Defense headquarters. Footage then allegedly shows riot police raiding the Wagner Group's headquarters in St. Petersburg amidst the mercenary firm's mutiny against the Russian Ministry of Defense, something I imagine the staff at the at the headquarters was expecting for quite a while. And then the Wagner Group mercenary firm has now agreed to turn around their convoy to Moscow after a deal guaranteeing their safety was negotiated by Belarus. I don't know much of the ins and outs of what the the deal that was negotiated by Belarus was about. I don't really know much about that. I didn't have time to research it.
I've been seeing people talking about it as effectively a right-wing protest, that like they're mad that Russia is kind of getting its ass kicked. And they're also mad that like Putin isn't even more of a fucking Nazi. Yeah, so it's also Popular Front's, as you already cited Popular Front, but their coverage of, their conflict journalism in general is great, and of this in particular has been fantastic. And I think Jake Hanrahan has just started a new podcast called Sad Oligarch, which is, I haven't started listening to it yet, but I'm sure it's good. Our boy he does the good juice. It's about the oligarchs who've been being assassinated, possibly with ties to the Kremlin in the last few months.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah, Popular Front is fantastic on the ground journalism of this kind of stuff. So go check it out. Go check out the podcast, etc., etc. Big shout out. But yeah, it'll be interesting at least to see how this develops in the future. But Sophie, you've got something to tell us about something that happened this week that
a thing happened.
Yeah,
I'm sure no one's heard about this. No, I'm kidding. It's the Titan submersible again. I haven't got many notes because it's like, wow, everyone's talked this to death. So I thought I'd just read from the first paragraph of Wikipedia. On 18th of June 2023, Titan, a submersible operated by OceanGate, an American tourism company, imploded during its descent in the North Atlantic Ocean, about 400 nautical miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. The submersible, carrying 5 people, was part of a tourist expedition to observe the wreck of the Titanic. Communication with Titan was lost 1 hour and 45 minutes into its dive to the wreck site. Authorities were alerted when it failed to resurface at the scheduled time later that day. So I mean, this was all anyone was talking about for a couple of days, and then it turned out that they died instantaneously, and at the moment that they lost communication, because apparently they heard an implosion sound at the end of the communication. So it's like, yeah, they knew the whole time. One interesting thing I saw, which also just looking back on the Wikipedia, it says the search area was informed by the U.S. Navy's sonar detection of an acoustic signature consistent with an implosion around the time communications with the submersible ceased. Apparently, the U.S. Navy had a bunch of submarine detection mics all over the ocean there, and hadn't told anyone. But then when a billionaire needs finding, they let on that they had that and let everyone know, which was really cool. I love that the sea is under surveillance. Normal Planet is you're listening to Normal Planet.
New title of the show.
I don't want to add too much more onto, again, something that's been talked to death. I was watching Philomena Kunk, who just does like a Brian Cox style complete like gibberish show. It's fantastic, and her bit about the Titanic was actually like, she started calling it the Titan 1C, like she'd misread the name, and that just made her whole segment seem like it had accidentally predicted the Titan.
Incredible.
You can check it out online. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say about the Titan. Kira, do you want to tell us about the revelations in Israel this week?
Sure, yeah. And our thoughts and prayers are with the billionaires' families, for the record. So NYU's top Center for Israeli Studies has just launched like days ago this Jewish Settlements Archival Project. So what they're doing is they're making available to the public previously unavailable materials, Israeli records that were previously not accessible to the public. So just to frame this particular segment, as we all know, the classic Israeli apologia is trying to portray Israel as a country that is like a liberal democracy, that is a victim of these radical terrorist Palestinians and their aggressive, horrible terrorism, and that, yes, there are fascist elements in Israel, but it's just these radical right-wing Israelis, and it's not representative of the entirety of the institution of Israel. However, with these newly revealed records, there's this new article in the Haaretz that kind of completely demolishes this narrative. So records reveal that in the 1970s, Israel deliberately poisoned Palestinian land to clear the way for the establishment of the West Bank settlements. So there's this covert operation carried out by Israeli authorities, mind you, not some radical offshoots, not some like random group of right-wing Israelis that the Israeli government doesn't claim. This is like the actual Israeli government in the 1970s carried out this covert operation to poison agricultural land and the water. This contaminated the soil and the water of Palestinian farmers, and the goal was to displace Palestinian communities and pave the way for the construction of a settlement in the occupied West Bank. And I'm going to read a quote right now. The first step was dispossessing residents of the nearby Palestinian village of their land under the false pretense of making it a military training zone. When the Palestinians insisted on cultivating the land, Israeli soldiers sabotaged their tools. Soldiers were later ordered to use vehicles to destroy the crops. A radical solution was employed. When this failed, a crop duster spread a toxic chemical. The substance was lethal for animals and dangerous for humans. So the long-lasting consequences of these actions have, like, still to this day are impacting generations upon generations of Palestinians who have been denied their right to utilize their land for agricultural purposes. And what's also extremely gross is that the records also reveal that the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Meir, I hope I'm not mispronouncing. I'm horrible. Meir urged Zionist leaders to hush on what they were doing in order to help perpetuate the propaganda, the PR, that Israel is a liberal institution that is, you know, not actually a fascist occupation of Palestinian land. So that's pretty despicable and on par with exactly what we at Red Planet, and I'm sure the audience, their opinion of Israel. However, it's disgusting. And also, just to say that, and the title of this particular segment that I wrote here in our notes says, I actually added as well, Israel is basically Cardassia. So if you're familiar at all with Cardassia and Star Trek, Cardassia is a I'll go through this very quickly, Conrad, don't worry. Cardassia is a is an alien race in the Star Trek universe, and they're considered to be like basically a fascist race. And so one of the things they did when they occupied Bajor, a planet of farmers, and they don't have like massive weaponry, you know, they're just kind of just subsisting on their land and just, you know, being people with self-determination. Cardassia shows up with like their massive weapons and everything, take over the planet, enslave the Bajorans. And then when the Bajorans finally revolt after like 50 years of occupation, Cardassia, upon leaving, poisons the water and the lands of Bajor to make sure that Bajorans can't actually use that land. And so Israel is Cardassia.
Yeah,
they're
it's
kind of doing the same thing.
It's like discussing DS9 with people. I hear people like point to Cardassia and Bajor being lots of different things, because like I think the Cardassia is just a really good like analysis of how an occupying force works, and that's like, I don't know, it's fascinating. This is why we want to get the audience to do a watch party with DS9 episodes, because like it is utterly a fascinating piece of political fiction. Yeah, but I think that like the fact that the Israeli government seems to be taking like just notes directly from like the purest possible model of like fascist occupiers. Yeah, good stuff.
All right, so Tim, can you tell me about what's going on in Mexico City?
I sure can. So Mexico City holds mass celebration for same-sex wedding and gender ID changes. Hundreds of same-sex couples and transgender people in Mexico City celebrated weddings and the completion of administrative processes to change their gender on Friday, in a mass ceremony a day before the city's annual Gay Pride March. Kayla Espinoza, a 38-year-old who married her partner Vanitza Garcia, said it was very emotional to the step to marriage after having lived together. I didn't think it would happen like this. It's very exciting. So in 2019, Mexico City became the first jurisdiction in Latin America to legalize same-sex marriage. It took until last year, however, for the rest of the country to follow suit, with Tamaulipas becoming the final state to do so in October. Another 131 people in the capital are set to complete administrative gender change processes, the city government said. Transgender people face many hurdles when they cannot update legal documents such as ID cards to reflect their gender identity. This is actually something we spoke about last week with in New Zealand. We've just finally got the self ID kind of thing goes through, so you can just do it quite easily now. And yeah, me and Soph talked about why some people might not even want to do that, you know, various kind of things.
It's kind of fascinating seeing like the imperial, like the most reactionary parts of the imperial core making shit worse for everyone, as if like they won't just leave. Like the other countries are just literally becoming better places to be for trans people.
Yeah. So the process, which is free in Mexico City, comes after legal reform in 2014, allowing adults to change their gender on birth certificates and electoral cards if they identify as a different gender from the one assigned at birth. So yeah, that's it. Free in Mexico City. Cool. Well, Mule, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is happening at Harmonsworth Immigration Removal Center?
Yeah, this is another big one. I'm going to try and keep it as succinct as possible. But Rivka Brown from Novara Media on Twitter was reporting today that detainees at Harmonsworth Immigration Removal Center have occupied the courtyard. Just to be clear, Harmonsworth Immigration Removal Center. This is a place next to Heathrow, where they basically hold people before they deport them and make all these horrific decisions, leaving people in limbo. It's a vile, vile, vile place. And according to Rivka, as far back as 2016, the UK's chief prisons inspector described the conditions at the IRC as desolate. Quoted, with insect-infested rooms, poor ventilation, and unsanitary bathrooms. Also said some detainees were being held for a unreasonably long time. Referencing a report in The Guardian, Rivka points out that in November, power cuts at the centre meant it had to be closed for weeks, and that detainees temporarily relocated. ANFOL, I'm not sure what that is, if that's an abbreviation for someone or something, but ANFOL revealed that the cuts were a result of years of maintenance and neglect. So, we're talking just complete neglect, not bothered, not actually, doing any of the things that they're paid for in the maintenance department. Lesbians and gays support the migrants, supported the occupation today, saying on Twitter, today we went to Harmonsworth and Colnbrook detention centres to show solidarity with the detainees, but there was another protest happening inside. Hundreds were protesting the centre's appalling conditions. We could hear protesters making noise and refusing to be silenced in the courtyard. We also spoke to those inside who told us about people being denied medical care and being treated like they are less than human. This includes underage minors and those at serious risk for their physical and mental health. Those inside described it to us as a human rights crisis, and we agree. This is just one in a series of protests organised by detainees at migrant detention centres in the UK since the hostile environment has been deployed by the Tories to serve the imperial cause, white supremacist hegemony over their whatever fucking 15-year rule or whatever it is now. And we at Red Planet show solidarity to all detainees and migrants in their struggle, and we wish them success in finding a safe, healthy, and luxurious place to live. But Sophie, tell us about Honor Oak.
Yeah, I've got some comrades of the show to talk about this week. Both of these ones are in the UK. One is to do, they're both trans related. One is to do with the regular conflict that's been happening at the Honor Oak pub that hosts a drag event, has been targeted by Turning Point UK and a bunch of neo-Nazis. And then a bunch of cops have been protecting the fascist protest rather than telling them to just move on, as they become increasingly violent and trying to threaten queer and trans people there. The counter protest has been getting bigger and bigger, and month by month. The fascists have been more laughably outnumbered every time. But this month being Pride Month, I guess, the fascists decided to do something a little special and showed up early to attack people who were there earlier and in smaller numbers, trying to smash the windows of the pub, they physically attacked quite a few people at the Honor Oak protest, so quite a few comrades got hurt. But I think it's important to understand that this is their deliberately desperate tactic. They are trying to escalate, but in a way that they still feel safe. And as ever, they got outnumbered once again as the day went on. People started having parties. I think people had, I think I saw a grill out. So like, as ever, fascists are a superstitious and cowardly lot, and we just have to outnumber them and show that the community wants them to fuck off. Eventually, they will. But yeah, solidarity to people who were there and who are hurt. Trans Safety Network's Jess O'Thompson, friend of the show, was threatened. Also, Ada Cable, who's been on the show before to talk about queer care, was actually punched by a cop while trying to give someone first aid. So I'm gonna wish her well, wish her love and solidarity, and ACAB, as always, absolute pieces of shit.
Sending you love, Ada.
Yeah, also Amar, a friend of the show, who hopefully we'll have on soon because they're a very cool organizer, was there and got arrested, but like let out the same day. So, you know, things could have been worse. Anyway, that's the first one. The second Comrades of the Show piece is just a shout out for Dandelion. So Dandelion here's highlighted by Trans Liberation Front Bristol, and is a direct action group organizing events and spaces to engage in harm reduction for trans people who are using DIY HRT. They basically are just helping people out. They provide some free vegan food. I think it's important to point out stuff like this for people who are outside of London, because so many trans people are kind of concentrated in London. But yeah, this is in Bristol. It's a harm reduction information center and needle exchange for people who self-medicate. And as I said, they have free vegan food. The next one's they had one I think on the 18th of this month. I don't know when the next one is, but yeah, that's like what people knowing about in case anyone happens to be in the Bristol area. Yeah, cool. It's time to talk to our guest. I'm very excited about our guest this week. We're talking to an anarchist chemist who publishes information to help people, for example, who are in places where abortion is illegal. And I wanted to open, to introduce by quoting from one of the books they recommended that we read, which I think it's the first guest we've had do that. And also, like, all of the books they recommended, I found excellent. I'm sure we'll talk about it more in a second. It's just the opening of a book called A Woman's Book of Choices that Tim was talking about in his Most Base this week, which is actually written a while ago now, but still begins. Women today are faced with two contradictory facts of life. One is that the United States Supreme Court is but one vote away from overturning Roe v. Wade, the historic 1973 decision that legalized abortion. The second is that women have always gotten abortions by any means necessary and will no doubt continue to do so, regardless of cultural standards, religious prohibitions, regressive social movements, or the law. This week we're talking to Mixæl Laufer. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Really excited to have you. Like I say, you're the first guest to give us a reading list, but I appreciated it because I thought they were all really, really cool books. Shall we begin maybe by chatting more about A Woman's Book of Choices? Because Tim also really enjoyed it and has been sharing it with people.
Yeah. We were just talking earlier about how impressive it is, how it's like they just considered everything from so many angles. Yeah, definitely one of the better better examples of a book that is like a book about politics, but is like very practical and like, you know, like I can see it being useful to just everyone. I want to send it to everyone.
Yeah, I of course enjoy it very much. At the same time, it's also really sad that a book that's decades and decades old is still the best thing that's available on the book market, as it were.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, I wonder, is there an updated version? Is there something more modern, you know? But yeah, no, it doesn't appear so.
Bizarrely, not really, or not that I've found. The thing about abortion books that are looking at methodologies of direct action, you can count them on one hand. And again, most of them are from a similar era in terms of publication date. There was a period of time where seemingly there was a place for that, and people who wanted to do it and had the wherewithal and the means to push that sort of thing through. And there unfortunately hasn't been much in the way of updates in all this time.
That makes me think of also another book that you recommended to us was called The Crime of Reason. And in there, the author was talking about how like entire pathways of knowledge or like ways of reasoning about stuff can be like, yeah, made illegal. And their example, or one of the examples discussed, was like nuclear physics, because like you know, of the obvious kind of dangerous implications of like democratization of like nuclear power or nuclear weapons, and just to like I just found that fascinating. I was a bit of a maths geek in high school, so like the idea of like like calculations people could do that is illegal because of its implications to the political world.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually did that in Texas some years ago. I think it was 2017, but there was a body modification, bodily autonomy conference that was held called Body Hacks in Austin, which, Texas is not a particularly welcoming place for people who aspire to have bodily autonomy, as you know. And I did it on stage. I put up a slide that had that wonderful bumper sticker that says "Think it's not illegal yet," and I pointed to it and I said, "This is actually not true." And then I put up the neutron transport equation, and I sort of talked through the calculation for coming up with the cross section for, I think it was probably plutonium or uranium-238. I'm not sure which I did, but I said, and doing this calculation, which is merely uncovering a fundamental fact about the structure of matter in the universe, is not just a crime, not just a felony, not just a federal felony, but a capital felony. It commands the death penalty in the United States. And luckily I wasn't executed for that, but I mean, I did it mostly to just exhibit how preposterous it is to talk about things like that in terms of having scientific inquiry be controlled, in terms of having ideas be property, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's not totally illegal yet. There's well, speaking of like ideas being property, you also recommended us Information Feudalism, and I'm deliberately discussing these books because I feel they all got really, really interesting ideas in them, and I feel like it's the reason you recommended them to us is like they together build a really good premise for discussing your work. So Information Feudalism, can you just like briefly tell us kind of the idea in that, or just it touches on what you were just saying?
Sure. Well, there were these two professors who had gotten together and sort of looked at the landscape of what was happening with the progression of intellectual property as a concept and the way that it is playing out both politically and socially, and most of all economically. And it ties into what Lachlan wrote about in The Crime of Reason, where there are these watershed moments that you can sort of point to in history where economics and morality come to an impasse. You have this fascinating moments where you will have people who come at an issue from a moral perspective, and what they will say is, what's happening is wrong. And very predictably, the response comes, well, yes, this is strange and it's unfortunate and it's happening for historical reasons that are based in things that don't really apply anymore. However, this is what our economy runs on, and so we just have to deal with it. And in key cases, the moralists have come back and said, that's not good enough. If this is the way that our economy runs, we need a new economy. And you can go as far back as the Reformation and look at it. You can look at the Cold War and look at it. In the United States, the quintessential example of this was slavery, saying people can't be property. That is just fundamentally wrong. And again, the same dialogue happened where it was, yes, okay, yeah, we understand, and no, this really isn't the right thing to do. However, this is what our economy runs on, so we just have to kind of deal with it. And the moralist said, well, that's just not good enough. And the thing that I see is something very similar happening now, where there are those of us who are saying ideas can't be property. Ideas belong to humanity, period. And again, this very, very predictable response comes, oh, yes, that is a hackneyed idea that comes out of some ideas that happened very long ago in Europe because of certain things about trade guilds and printing presses and this, that, and the other. And yes, it is being abused. And it doesn't work in a really optimal way, and there are people, and oh yes, I mean yes, and people are dying because they don't have access to medicines because of this, and that's all very unfortunate. However, there are trillions of dollars circling the world because of this system, and we can't just pull the rug out from under it.
Right,
And
exactly.
there are some of us who are saying, well, that's just not good enough. That's exactly what we need to do. So yeah, that's the sort of bridge between those that I think is really fascinating. And they point out, the two of them, a number of very specific cases of where these sorts of problems have come into really extreme states, where you have ebooks where it would be illegal to read it aloud, or the fact that somebody patented ways to swing on a swing in a public park, and that in theory you are violating somebody's patent on, and that if they were to come after you, you would be liable for patent infringement. And patent law does vary both across the world and from country to country, both in the international intellectual property laws and national ones. And the strangest one, the one that I find the most peculiar, is that in the United States, not only are there not personal use exemptions like you have in Scandinavia and Belgium, and a few other places in Europe, but even if you utilize the patent so-called as designed, if you are running a research lab where you're trying to replicate the work that is outlined in a patent so that you can further the research, which theoretically is why patents are okay, you're in violation just doing that research. And so there's no way to say, oh, I'm utilizing this as designed, don't sue me. No, you are on the hook no matter what. And they point out the ways that intellectual property law has metastasized into every facet of life and becomes something that makes it more and more difficult for anyone not affiliated with the might of an institution behind them to do much of anything.
I really like how, like, what you're talking through is the bridge between those, like the way you're talking about a conversation between moralists and I guess people who'd probably call themselves realists, but really like it might be more appropriate to just call them economists, like you keep on saying.
I think it would be appropriate to call them apologists.
Right, absolutely. I mean, like a lot of people who call themselves realists are apologists, and like I think that like that their side, as you're pointing out, is defined by making apologia for the economy and just saying like, no, the economy is the important thing, or other people saying no, this is immoral. And that reminds me of like the kind of analysis from oh, hey there, your camera's on, cool. Nice to see you. From Sylvia Federici, the feminist Marxist in Caliban and the Witch.
Fucking love that book.
It's so fucking good. We on the left are called moralists frequently, even though like a lot of our analysis is economic, and it's like because we're having a moral analysis of history and not willing to just be okay with like, well, the economy relies on this, therefore. It's just interesting, like, because like I think Federici's point is repeatedly that like a state needs people first and foremost, and so states are trying to have sovereignty over like how much people are making more people, and in what ways, right? Which like the way that it ties in with Crime of Reason has me wanting to reread Caliban and the Witch. I think we've talked enough about books for 1 second. That I do want to get to the other two more, but like the other one really, but we talked enough about books to talk about your work. So would you like to tell the audience what it is you actually do?
So I am with the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective, and we're a group that aims to bring medicines and medical technologies to people who need them but don't have them for whatever reason in any way we can manage. The main ways that this tends to manifest are a lack of infrastructure, or legality, or price, and price links into what you were mentioning earlier. Typically, price is dictated by intellectual property law controls and medicinal monopolies. So most of the approaches that we take are trying to disassemble the science and present methodologies by which people can build medicines and medical technologies on their own without having to interface with medical infrastructure. And by that means, you can typically bypass problems of legality and infrastructure and price.
So the thing that most, like, I would say if people have just kind of randomly tuned in and they, you know, maybe don't know you by name, the thing that they probably might have heard about is probably the EpiPencil, right? The
Yeah, that one was well timed. We got very lucky there, where Heather Bresch, who was the CEO of Mylan at the time, was lying in front of Congress, and there was a lot of outcry about it in the public discourse. And yeah, we came up with a pretty slick solution where you could take a couple of off-the-shelf parts and put them together and make your own for a hundredth the price, essentially.
Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. And yeah, it lines up so much with the from A Woman's Book of Choices, the invention of the Dandelion machine, you know, like this thing that how it was a device that could literally just be made, you know. They have all the parts. Says you go to a hardware store, you get this, you go to a pet store and you buy this.
Well, and the truth is that technology still accessible, and it still works, and it still is worth pursuing in a lot of cases. It's not as popular, not as many people know about it, but menstrual extraction is very effective, and I think people are a little hesitant to use it sometimes because there are concerns about sterile technique. But it doesn't really take a lot to understand how to not give somebody an infection.
Yeah, I actually I was reading through it, and it reminded me my first, because I've been working in the tattoo shop since I think 2004, and it reminded me so much of my my body piercing apprenticeship way back in the day. And I was like, oh yeah, I already know all this stuff, and you know, like using sterile equipment and aseptic technique and everything. Yeah, it is something that you can teach people. Yeah,
right. And it's not that tricky. I think that the most critical thing about sterile technique is the focus you need to bring to it. You need to be very aware of what you're doing, that you don't reach up and adjust your glasses, that now your hand is not sterile anymore, that you don't hand somebody.
We always had a even like the concept of, you know, like the clean hand, dirty hand for like certain things and stuff. Like you would have like one hand that is like nothing, this doesn't touch anything, you know. Right. And so I've even found that like years later I still have that kind of you know, like that muscle memory when I'm doing stuff, where it's like even if I'm doing something at home, like cleaning the dishes or whatever, like you know, I'll be doing it unconsciously with my like clean hand. Yeah,
me too. I think it's one of those things that gets built in, depending, because there are a couple different levels of sterile technique, right? There's sterile technique for doing you know, small scale stuff. There's sterile technique for like lab, when you're dealing with microorganisms. And then there's sterile technique for when you're doing surgery, right? Or I should say more invasive surgery than just piercing, right?
Yeah.
I have a sort of separate part of my life with cyborg type people, and so we do experimental surgery and implantations of cybernetic devices, and that's one of these things where it's like you have to be very careful, and the rules sort of strictures go up, where for surgery, if your hands leave your field of view, they are no longer sterile. And so that's like an extra vigilance. But again, the sterile technique is, again, I think
it's how surgeons walk like this.
Yeah, right.
It's part of it. Yeah.
You are the coolest person I've ever met. That's my whole interjection.
Well, I'm flattered. Thank you. Well,
So our producer hasn't put your camera on yet, but I feel like even for when he does get back from his smoke break and do that, the listeners to the podcast version of this deserve to know as well that you're wearing like a leather maybe biker jacket, and you got a t-shirt with the definition of revolutionary on it. What is the definition of revolutionary on the shirt? Because I'm curious about it and how you consider your work and life in relation to it.
It's kind of worn. But this was from Viper Records. See if I can still read it. It says, involving or visioning complete dismantlement and change, embodying the. It's worn very down, but it's
I think the lower one says engaged in or promoting political revolution. And then number 3 says me.
I think it's kind of it's good that it's worn in, right? Like, you know, it's like when you see someone that has like a classic kind of leftist tone, like, you know, like Capital or the Conquest of Bread, it's like super worn.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be the same if it was fresh.
I didn't just buy it for the interview. It was just the least dirty thing I had to wear today.
Very anarchist, yeah.
But yeah, do you feel that your work is revolutionary? Is kind of the like my more serious point after praising your style.
Well, it aspires to be, certainly. The work of trying to foment revolution is never complete, and so to say that a work is revolutionary is almost contradictory internally, because that is an aspirational set of things that you undertake that never really is exhausted. So we try to work toward that direction. That's the thing. Revolution is not. It's not an end state. It's a direction you can go. It's not a place that you would ever arrive.
Yes, a vanishing point. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so we try to do our level best to move things in that direction as best we can within our little niche. So yes, aspirationally, I would say, yeah, we're trying our damnedest.
Fantastic. I think that when you describe your work, one thing people immediately think about is what trouble you've encountered with the law when you talk explicitly about like getting information to people in places where it is illegal to have that information. If you've like had trouble yourself, like not asking you for your like criminal record or whatever, but just like what challenges have you faced in like trying to do the work you do?
Well, what I can say about that is that we do have a very sophisticated security team and a really astute and erudite group of people who think very carefully about the management of risk and how to get as much information to as many people as possible while still making sure that most of our people remain at liberty. It's all of the sort of things that you hear typical anarchist groups talk about: having good security culture, trying to just have, like sterile technique, you need to have this sort of instinct of when things are infected. Anytime that you say anything to anyone at any time over a channel that's not encrypted, you must assume that that is public information that will remain in the record forever. And so practices like that, trying to be cautious about to whom you speak and about what, and over which channels, has, for the most part, kept us all pretty safe. And the maxim holds that nobody ever got caught by being too paranoid. And so we come across somebody who is a little more strict in their security practices than you are, my advice is, try not to roll your eyes too much and understand that they may have a different set of parameters and a different set of risks that you don't know about. And it happens to all of us. I was in, gosh, I shouldn't even be too specific. I was in Europe the week before last, and I was having a conversation with some people about the manufacture of HRT, and they were very, very careful, much more than I would have been given the subject of our conversation, but that was their protocol. So when you interact with somebody new, the default should always be to follow the security protocol of the person who has stricter security measures, because that way everybody's as safe as they feel they need to be. Yeah. And again, it varies from project to project and person to person. There are people like myself who are very public about our involvement in the collective. There are people who are in the collective where nobody knows their real name or where they live. And that's just necessary because of how people interface with the world.
Yeah, and I'm part of the reason I ask is because of, as you say, you are fairly public, and what it makes me think of instantly is like I know a lot of trans people who are very anxious about more or less fascist activity in places that they live, and for me the answer has always been to be plugged in with anti-fascist researchers and to know therefore what fascists are up to, and therefore like I can have a reasonable assessment of, as you say, like risk parameters. So like I'm saying it because your public, like I don't want to say publicity, publicness anyway, speaks to a being plugged into security culture very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that caution is with good reason, and it's part of my role in the organization to assume a greater level of risk than the people who do the more important work of actually doing the science and keeping things going. And because I'm able to sort of shine the light on myself, it allows for more to happen in the places where it needs to in safer ways.
Yes, this is a kind of crowd response to panopticon theory, is like if there is attention drawn into one particular spot, then it's not elsewhere. Yeah,
right. You start a riot in B-wing in the prisons so that people can do some things maybe over an H block. Yeah, no, it's a
for sure.
Tale as old as time.
You did mention you don't have to go into this at all about what you were doing or where you were or anything like that, but you mentioned talking to people about the HRT thing and stuff, which is something that we have covered before, like
yes.
DIY HRT. We've talked about it quite a few times on the stream.
Yeah. Our most recent addressing of it was like we talked to someone who's done a lot of research into how people manufacture it, so we can have a more detailed discussion about supply lines and so on.
Yeah, we were talking, me and so we're actually talking earlier about the like the weird kind of well, it's not weird, it's like the totally obvious parallels between like the stuff happening in A Woman's Book of Choices and then the HRT, the DIY HRT thing, and how it's like this like bodily autonomy movement. And we've talked a lot before about like how it seems like the conservative rights kind of the pushback is a lot of it concerns bodily autonomy in general, like whether it's like people taking HRT, people like with like the legality of abortion and all that kind of thing like that, and it seems to be it's like the same battleground sort of thing. But are there any like what other I guess what other frontiers have you seen, or have you seen any other kind of places where the similar thing is being like the similar battle is kind of playing out? Because I was actually really struck when Soph kind of like actually brought that up to me. I think it was on a stream about saying like, oh yeah, this is the same fight, the reproductive thing, the HRT thing, it's the same thing, it's bodily autonomy.
Can I just jump into that question and say that this also relates to the last book that you recommended, which we haven't talked about yet, Medical Nemesis, right? To do with our bodily autonomy being impacted by what medical practices and information belong to which huge monopolists or whatever.
Yeah, like I was just wondering, like, is this is there another area that you see the same thing happening that perhaps me and or the others here are ignorant to, that is kind of like the same struggle or whatever? Can you think of anything like that? Or
Oh yeah. The problem is that unlike abortion and HRT, the majority of those battles have been one-sided, where there hasn't been a return fight. You see any number of groups which are suffering and are marginalized because of their lack of access to care and bodily autonomy in a lot of ways, a lot of different places. And there are two things about this. The first one is just that it's very sad to see that it's not a battle. It's more like just a slaughter that's happening. And then the second part is that the battle of which you speak, I find, is often misunderstood in its dynamic structure. Oftentimes when people will talk about access to reproductive technology, access to gender affirming technology, that it's seen as this two-sided thing where there are people who want bodily autonomy and there are people who have some sort of belief that people shouldn't have access. When in fact, there's a third facet and it's totally asymmetric. The third group is a group that sees the group who does not believe that everyone should have access to healthcare as easily manipulated and very well organized and strong as a voter base. And they are used as a lever. And so it's very strange to see that there's sort of this shadow where it's one thing leveraging another very opportunistically. And it's weird too, because if you look at some historic meteoric rises of politicians on the right, notably Ronald Reagan, notably some more recent pontiffs of the United States whose names I shan't even utter, started their careers as being pro-choice because opportunistically it was the better move. And then they realized that the evangelicals were very well organized in the US and formed a very strong voter base, and then just decided to, shift gears. But to answer the meat of your question, or the textured vegetable protein of your question, is that yes, you see it starting in the diabetic communities now, because it's been so critical that people are dying in ways that are more visible. There's this strange phenomenon where if people are dying in small numbers, in unpredictable specific times and circumstances, even if it's happening consistently and regularly, it's easily ignored. And when it's happening it's sort of the car crash versus plane crash thing. If a plane crashes, everybody kind of loses their mind, even though it's only a couple hundred people, because it looks like this terrible thing that went wrong. And when instead every month you have tens of thousands of people who die in car accidents just in the US, and nobody seems to think that that's a problem because it's just an accident. You see similar things happening in the health realm, where you'll have something happen where there's an outbreak of something at a hospital and everybody loses their minds. or there's some form of medical malpractice, or somebody makes a mistake in an operating room and somebody dies in a routine operation. It's this terrible tragedy. Everybody's very upset. And why isn't somebody doing something about this? And where was the regulation? And yet, so many people are just sent home without any support. They get stabilized and then pushed out of urgent care or whatever it is, and that just happens. And so, because the rate of death and the fact that the amount of time that somebody can survive without insulin, if they are diabetic, is on the order of hours rather than days or weeks, that suddenly this comes into the public consciousness in a way that somehow is harder to ignore. But you see this just everywhere. It's one of those things that once you start looking for it, it's hard to not see. Kind of actually another group that is actually actively fighting back, ironically, is the Right to Die movement. The talk about bodily autonomy. We are friends with Philip Nishka and Exit International and a few other groups that are working very hard to give people about the most critical piece of autonomy that you could come up with, which is life is voluntary, or should be. And there's this bizarre shadow war going on against these people, from where is not entirely known, and why is entirely unknown. But there, several years ago, when was it that this started? It started in 2019, in mid-2019. There were raids by Interpol, like tactical teams that were kicking in the doors of chronically ill octogenarians and nonagenarians, taking their drugs and dragging them out of their houses and arresting them. And it's still not clear, at least to me, maybe somebody knows, but I have yet to uncover where the heat is coming from and who's pushing this agenda. But it's got to be somebody, because that takes budget and authority. So somebody okayed that operation. So yeah, you're seeing it with diabetics, you're seeing it with Right to Die people, but I think it applies everywhere. And especially in the bizarre places of dichotomy where a place is resource rich, so the needed medicines are present, and yet access is disallowed, which always seems so strange. Somehow it's a little easier to say, okay, somebody's in a very poor country where they don't have the infrastructure to refrigerate some monoclonal antibody and get it from point A to point B so that whoever needs it can get it. Okay, we should be working on that. There are ways to fix that type of problem. But to say there's somebody in New York City who needs a life-saving medication that is in any number of dozens of hospitals in the exact same city and they can't get it, something's very, very wrong. I feel that it's very illustrative in a really sad way of the state of humanity when there is so much time and so many resources and so much energy and thought that's placed into inventing life-saving medications, and then delivery is refused.
Yeah, I mean, commodification is perfidious and horrible, and we don't like. I like to talk about the neoliberalization of water infrastructure in India often, because like most people think it's fine that they have a water bill, but why are you paying for water? Like, water is the most fundamental piece of our life, And like in India, you know, in poorer neighborhoods where you're less likely to be able to afford it, the prices can be, you know, dozens or you know, dozens of times as high as it is in richer neighborhoods where they definitely will be able to afford it, because you can't make the shakedown of charging people money for water expensive for rich people. They could move neighborhood, but you can for poor people.
Yeah, and that's not the only place where it's a problem. And yeah, it's so bizarre, and you see things like that and parallels of it, and you know, you shudder to think where else it might start showing up in terms of things that are necessary for life. I mean, you know, sleep, air, food. You know, some of these we already see starting to happen, and you can only imagine that we're not the first people to think about this, and the first people who thought about it probably were not thinking in terms of trying to bring humanitarian aid, but rather, oh, what's another rent-seeking strategy that we can employ?
Yeah, exactly.
To bleed people out.
We're already seeing this, like you mentioned, with like the luxury air industry that's like officially, formally has now emerged with all of these, very much with all these like fires that are turning various parts of the world's skies orange and making causing like permanent damage to people's lungs and chronic health issues down the line. Rich people can go on vacation. Rich people can stay indoors in the HEPA filtered environment or go to a hotel in the HEPA filtered environment. Poor people are like working the fields. They have to leave the house. They are not, they can't afford or have access to means to protecting themselves. Not to mention that like the entire reason that the skies are turning orange is also driven by the rich and driven by, you know, capitalism. So yeah, it's like you said, it's like, oof, I also shudder to think of what we will be seeing in the future, because all these different, like, just unthought of horrors are emerging. Like a luxury air industry is a bleak phrase.
Well, Sophie's talking about water. I saw a comment on the chat that was like something like, you know, what are they gonna do next? Like, you know, like something about, are they gonna take the air or whatever? And then like immediately Kira starts talking about like, so that's
it's interesting to think about those parallels too, right? Because again, you think of the things that you will die without. And okay, you know, hunger and food commodification has been a problem for eternity, or since civilization kind of became a thing and trade was a thing in agrarian society. But again, you know, okay, food, you can go without it for about a month before you die. You think about one that we haven't broached yet, which is sleep. Like you can go about 11 days before you die without sleep. And you think about water, that's about 3 days. Air, a few minutes tops. Like I'm not quite sure what the world record is. There's maybe some deep sea divers who have done maybe 20 minutes or something, but still, you want to find a way to stratify the importance. It bleeds in really quickly. And one of the, you know, to talk about sleep, I think that sleep is one of the things that's not discussed enough in terms of general health and wellness. But if you talk to anybody who is an athlete, they will tell you that that is the secret ingredient. That if you want to perform better as an athlete, you need to sleep. You need to have more sleep. You need to have higher quality sleep. And in modern society, we really fetishize exhaustion, which is quite a crime. And then on top of that, there's the way that the notion of work has shifted, that the idea of rest is seen as, to use your word, Kara, luxury, not something that's really fundamental to life. And just to put some really, really scary numbers down, in the so-called United States, there's this very bizarre practice of so-called daylight savings time, which means that you have a clinical trial with 350 million people where twice a year for one night, they get either 1 hour fewer or 1 hour more of sleep. And if you look at the day after, at every single health metric, you see roughly a 10% shift both ways. So after having 1 hour less of sleep, there are roughly 10% more heart attacks the following day. There are 10% more fatal car accidents. There are 10% more cases of domestic abuse. And you can just go down the line of just about every horrific thing that you would think, yeah, if I had a bad night of sleep, I might be a little more grumpy and might be a little less attentive to important things. All of those things happen. And conversely, on the flip side, when everybody gets an extra hour more, there is roughly 10% fewer heart attacks, car accidents, yada yada, all the way down. And we need to be nicer both to each other and ourselves. And as simplistic as that sounds, it really is, I think, horribly understated.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually solve an enormous amount.
I have some personal experience of this week. So I've been kind of ill and depressed over like the last 4 to 6 weeks kind of thing. One of the first things that this wave of sickness did, I don't really know what it was. It was kind of like a sinus thing, but it kept me up all night. To the point where, and what you're saying, Michael, is so extremely validating for me. It's validated my entire life because I am just a sleepy boy. I will sleep for 12 hours sometimes, and that's great, and I love it, and it's important to me.
That's good for you.
I've always hated, like, parents and partners being like, I can't believe you sleep so much. What's wrong with you? It's like, well, it just feels right. It's just what I am. Anyway, but this sickness has really fucked with my sleep to the point where I was getting really well. I was back in the gym this week, doing my lifting, doing my cardio, and I was feeling great about it. And, back to work, back to streaming, all this kind of stuff, content creation. Then on Wednesday, I went down to London with my union to do some just generic funding stuff, went down there, had an awful night's sleep in London, and then the next day I felt as if I was sick again. I literally felt like I was completely better, and then the sickness, it came back, and I had to get through this whole day just feeling like fucking garbage, and then for like another 2 days, like an extra 2 days, I was ill again. So yeah. this illness had clearly been like,
this is actually like a huge thing that I always tell people about getting tattooed, because people will come into getting a tattoo or whatever, and they'll think about like absolutely everything they need to do beforehand except for the most basic things, which is basically just like get a good night's sleep beforehand and have something to eat beforehand, and it's like, wow, when like it doesn't happen too often, but when people pass out, vomit, piss their pants, whatever, it's because of, and it's because they either haven't eaten beforehand, or a lot of the time it's because they haven't had a good night's sleep beforehand, and it's just like you wouldn't, like, it's a taxing thing to do on your body or whatever. You wouldn't I don't know, run a marathon or something without having a good night's sleep, but you'll sit there for hours in pain or whatever without sleeping the night beforehand. And I always find that like sleeping is like a much huger factor than a lot of the other stuff about how well someone's going to sit while they're getting tattooed. And then people always like look at you when if they pass out and they wake up, you ask them like, have you been sleeping well lately? And they're always like why? It's like, because you passed out on my floor.
Because you just had a little nap here.
Yeah, it's so sleepy.
Mule, it's interesting you brought up like going to London and sleeping worse, because like I was gonna say, the books that the books on the reading list that Michael gave us, like once I saw the arguments that they pieced together and how they were cohesive, I really did like you were saying, Michael, like see it everywhere. And it's funny you bring up sleep, because that was one I was thinking about, because in London, people sleep like dog shit unless like a place has been specifically like in some ways improved to be nicer to sleep in, and there are neighborhoods that are better to sleep in or whatever, but then there are also just like more expensive places, and places will be cheaper if they're like next to a busy road, and this like the same thing is true of air, to bring back like the luxury thing. Like there's so much commodification where like the general option might be free or cheap, but the expensive option is still just like the basic requirement. Like the expensive option would be to get a good night's sleep and to be able to breathe good air and get clean water and all these things, right?
Yeah, and DJ, as you point out, like there's no quicker way to disable the human immune system than to just deprive somebody of sleep. It's really quick. You don't really have to do much, and there have been so many studies of ways that lack of sleep impacts your health. You look at just about everything. Strokes go up, your sex hormones go down. If you're diabetic, all of that gets worse. Depression, weight management, hypertension, and like the weakened immunity thing is something that people just don't talk about, because like the immune system is just this black box and we don't understand it very well. And it's okay, we might not understand it very well, but we do know when it fails, and it fails when you don't have rest. That's one of the cases where it will for sure fail. And there's this, I like to call it somnolent bulimia that people tend to have, where it's like they'll just stay up and stay up and stay up until they hit a wall and then sleep. And that's not an approved technique under the Geneva Convention. If you're doing it to somebody else, why is it okay if you're doing it to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I remember reading something a while back that I think humans are one of the only mammals that can't just die from lack of sleep, because we get by on like, there'll be like these little moments of micro sleep that we get that's enough not to kill us.
It's not entirely true. It's very hard to kill a person, because again, like the body will just go into a shutdown mode. But if you forcibly keep somebody awake for 11 days, like they will just die.
Yeah, because I remember reading it was like actually quite easy for a lot of other mammals just to die from no sleep, and like this is like a thing that like like we like it's kind of like a thing where it's not taken that seriously, sleeping, where it's like, oh, it's fine, you'll just be a little bit tired or whatever. It's like, no, like
no.
Yeah. There's like one rave I regularly go to, and like I'm friends with a few people who go to like a few raves regularly, and like so this weekend I was up until like 7 a.m. one of the days, and the next time this rave comes around is going to be a day rave, and like a lot of my friends are really hyped about it. And like again, like went up because I was thinking about sleep because of these books. I was like, oh yeah, I think I'll probably have just a better time. Like, it'll be in the middle of the day, and then I'll go to bed at a normal time, having had fun with my friends.
Yeah, and the best, if anybody's looking for healthier sleep, there are a whole myriad of ways you can do this. But the best trick that I know that is not something that many people talk about is that most people set the wrong alarm. Most people set an alarm in the morning to wake up. You should not be doing this. You should be setting an alarm at night saying, turn off all your stuff, turn off the lights, feed the cat, crawl into bed, and let yourself fall asleep naturally. And then you let yourself wake up naturally, because, there are all these like fancy apps that will theoretically find the point where you're closer to shallow sleep than to deep sleep, so that you will not be as groggy. And those might or might not work. I don't know. But what's even better is if your body just naturally wakes up on its own. I haven't set a morning alarm since like college, and it was early college too, because I just decided I wasn't doing it anymore. And if you just have a regular, and it's really easy to not, right? Nighttime is like, oh, I can just stretch it. But if you just are vigilant about going to bed at a regular time, your body just loves routine in terms of sleep. If you eat at the similar times and you go to bed at similar times, then you'll wake up. And for the last 4 years, because of the time zone that I lived in, I had to wake up around 5:30 in the morning, and I never set an alarm. I was just up because I fell asleep around 9:30 or 10 when I felt tired, and it was plenty of sleep. So that's my best trick.
One of my favorite things about the show, about doing this show, is that we find like incredibly based people, and then we're like, you can have a soapbox to talk about the work you do, and they come on and they're like, we should all sleep better, and I'm like, I agree, yeah, that's true, yeah.
I mean, listen, it's one of those things where I think that for all of the work that we do regarding, you know, access to antiretrovirals and hepatitis C medications and you know, overdose prevention technologies and gender affirming technologies, if I could get everybody in the world to sleep better, it would do way more than all of the rest of it put together.
Because they could do all the rest of the stuff because they had some good sleep and make some smart decisions. Yeah.
You would be less cranky. Yeah, all of that.
But I mean, this is why we regularly include like just self-care in our most base thing we've done this week segment, because like it just genuinely is really important, like more important than can be stated, really. Like Arda Cable, who we mentioned in the news segment because she was at the Honor Oak demo when she came on the show. She's from Queer Care, frontline queer protest medics. And yeah, you know, in a similar way, like giving her a soapbox to talk about her work, she was like, go to your union meeting, your tenants union or whatever, and your direct action organizing, and be the one who does the dishes, because it's like that. This stuff to take care of each other and ourselves is like it.
Yeah, yes, and yeah, all of those things. It's really important to note that the important work is often the unseen work. When the most dangerous places in most countries are in hospitals, just probabilistically. That's where people die for lots of reasons, not just because they go there when they're ill, but also it's an easy place to become ill, and so on and so forth. If you have gone to a hospital and emerged alive, you did so because the custodians did their job, not because the doctors did their job. It's because somebody cleaned the MRSA off of your bed rail, and somebody changed your sheets and tucked them in so they were tight and didn't give you bed sores, and somebody mopped the floor and threw away the sharps properly. Like all of these things that are so boring and are the most critical. Sleep. What's the line from the Scottish play? The innocent sleep, the sleep that knits up the reveled sleep of care, the death of each day's life, sore labor's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher and life's feast. I mean, there you go, right?
Yeah, just be like 1% less cool would be my main takeaway. Other people have
like, what's that line? What's that line?
Yeah,
like anyone else has like memorized any Shakespeare.
Oh, I did it as a kid, so it's in there. It's all.
Listen, I was impressed. I don't know what the fuck you were talking about, but I was impressed.
I got lucky.
I just want to point out during this sleep discussion that's like, I know that's been touched on, but sleep, like we're talking about accessibility to sleep and like sleep hygiene techniques. Like these are all really great. Like, and they really should be taken very seriously. And honestly, I think there's a few intersections between like patriarchy and obviously capitalism, but like with why we have such like an anti-sleep culture and why sleep is considered almost like a weak, lazy, non-tough like feature or like quality or activity. But besides that, I just want to give a shout out to the workers that are working positions that they have to work that are unfortunately interfering with their sleep. Like not all of us have the luxury of setting alarm clocks at the times we would like to sleep, like graveyard shift workers. Like there's plenty of studies just to support what you were saying. There's plenty of studies that show that graveyard workers are at increased risk for like basically like everything. Like they work overnight, their circadian rhythms are messed up. Even if they receive like quote unquote adequate amount of sleep during the daylight hours, it still puts them at an increased health risk for a multitude of things. And it's just, if there's any graveyard shift workers or workers that like kind of, work later and it interferes with their sleep, solidarity with you, and let's fucking abolish the whole system that forces people to have to be in those positions.
Absolutely.
Because Michael was saying, why do we do this to ourselves? I was thinking, or why your boss does this to you. We just shared a tweet on the Red Planet Twitter a little bit ago. The heat wave in Texas right now, it's spiking like 47 degrees C, 117 Fahrenheit. And there isn't any kind of like state or federal mandated like breaks for water during an official heat wave. Like this is like people are being forced to destroy their bodies, and that's kind of the nature of there being one class who only have their bodies to rent in exchange for capital.
I saw actually there was a really good, well, it was like a little clip it was from a news segment down here the other night where it was interviewing like literal children, high school kids that were working late night shifts at places like Kmart and supermarkets and stuff like that to help, their family pay the bills, while also studying full time as like high school students and doing their exams and, getting ready for university and stuff. And it was wild because they kind of had framed it like, oh, these kids are like such hard workers and, like good on them being like the breadwinners and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. They are really hard workers. It's amazing and stuff. But like, also like, this is really fucked up. Like these are children, like teenagers that are, because of, the cost of living crisis sort of thing is so bad. And just because of, the way that these things work, they're being forced to go out. Some of them were saying that they were working till like, 2 to 4 a.m. sort of thing before, going home and then going to bed. And they're doing this on top of going to school all day and studying and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, like the narrative is just like, oh, wow, they're such hard workers. It reminded me of, when George W. Bush was doing those he had some guy up, he was doing like a Q&A thing with salt of the earth Americans, and some guy got up and was like, I have I work 3 jobs, and George was just like, that's a good hardworking American.
That was a mother.
Jesus Christ.
He was like, yeah, I forget exactly what he said, but it was a woman who works like 3 jobs, and she was like kind of speaking to him in this way of like I think my interpretation is that her voice suggested that this was something that she wasn't actually that into. But then he was just like, oh, that's fantastic. This is
incredible. Incredible.
Wonderful.
Scenes.
Yeah. And it was
like when the Beefeater outside Buckingham Palace fainted in the heat wave. Because the sun never sets on the British Empire.
Beefeater? That sounds like a slur. Like what's
I don't know. I don't know if it was
one
a
of those
Beefeater
palace guards with the furry hats, right?
Is that what they call
the royal
them,
guard
Beefeaters?
anyway? Oh yeah.
I don't think this guy was a Beefeater. A Beefeater is like a separate. They wear like a weird tabard, right? Like
really? Okay. Well, one of the royal guards anyway.
It's one of them cringe British guards. They're all the same. I agree.
That's my point, is like I don't have the same solidarity for him as to the to like workers in Texas right now, because it's like it's such a competitive position for someone in the armed forces to then get to be like royal guard, and it's only the most reactionary fucking people in the entire country work their way up to being like the king defenders.
Oh yeah. I thought maybe it was like some kind of like like there's a lot of British slang for people, like Cockney slang or whatever. I was thinking like, oh, maybe it's like a thing, like rich people eat beef, so it's like, oh, look at this beef eater.
I think it was actually one of the trombone players in the Royal Guards brass band. But yeah, nonetheless, they wear the big silly hats, and I'm sure they're very, very proud of themselves for sticking with their duty until they passed out.
I do just want to let the podcast listeners know that someone in the chat just said, call him shit eater because he ate shit. I thought that was I thought that was pretty
That's the
fucking good.
content- that's the content you could be catching if you're watching it live. Podcast listeners, consider it. Come check out 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. UK time, Red Planet Live.
Just thinking about, you know, every kind, like this is happening all over the place. Like I'm constantly thinking all the time now, due to climate change, how many different examples of this we're gonna see, right? Do you know what I mean? And how it all comes circling back to, you know, how important it is to have you know, medical aid for everybody, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to see more and more examples of this. We're going to see more and more people passing out at work. You know, there's going to be whole, I guess, swathes of jobs that are now unable to work in if you're disabled, right? If you have like chronically ill conditions, like, you know, you're not going to be able to work in this heat. You're not going to be able to do stuff. You know, how I guess effective our aircon's going to be. Our aircon's going to be taken out of some offices because
and that
you know,
that ties to us interviewing Common Humanity Collective as well, who are making like air filtration and air conditioner units as cheaply as possible and teaching other people how to do it. I just think it's like there are positive and negative liberties, right? There are negative liberties where people stop you doing a thing that you would otherwise do, and there are positive liberties where people facilitate you to do a thing that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. And it's just morally insane that we have, like, that we consider ourselves some kind of advanced, developed, civilized society, and our society doesn't, you know, positively enable people to live, like just be alive as the most basic one. And to link this back to abortion, a lot of people I think in the UK think that our legal situation is radically different from America, but like in the UK, abortion is illegal as the baseline reality. Like it is criminalized, and the legalization of abortion is by an exception for how many weeks it can be allowed for, which, you know, we saw a case in the news this last week of someone being prosecuted for having an abortion past that limit. And like it's very clear, like the people who see political capital in attacking bodily autonomy are pushing it in the UK now as well.
Yeah, it's happening in a lot of places. I've in the past I've worked with some people in Ireland where it's a much bigger problem. Not too far away in Poland as well, where it's also a huge problem. And it's you know, plenty of other places further from you, but it's always so peculiar when you see any sort of ideology that is based on restricting freedoms of others in ways that don't affect you literally at all. And it's a very, very strange thing. It's hard to, it's one of those things that's so hard to come to grips with when you look at it sort of plainly. So many things. It's like, oh, you know, that's been a problem for decades. People have been arguing about it, but why is that? Have people been arguing about it just because they haven't thought of anything better to do?
Yeah, or because they were told to in like a media environment discussing politics. I mean, this is something that's acutely in my mind, is like if I'm in public and I'm thinking about the possibility that someone might harass me, which like happens fairly frequently, like I find myself wondering about the things that someone like that might find objectionable about trans people. And whenever I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking how much all of it is none of their business. Like who I have sex with, or I'm trying to find me attractive or whatever, would be very high up their list of like things that basically is their concern and they think is a problem. And it's like, this is just none of your business unless you're interested.
And even then, because
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Given how I present currently, it might seem a little surprising, but I have been asked whether I'm cis or trans, and it was one of those things where it's like, first of all, I wonder why you care.
Yes.
And second of all, again, if it is because you're interested, and that would be a deal breaker one way or the other, I don't think I want to talk to you either.
No, 100%. This was online, but I got a comment on my channel the other day just that asked, "Are you a trans woman?" And I thought to myself, there's a very strange thing going on here, where if you have to ask, on the one hand, you already know, and on the other hand, you can't tell, so it doesn't matter. Like on any like level, it was very strange.
Yeah, it is pretty wild. You know, and like the we can always tell folks that just obviously never have any idea, can never actually tell.
Well, I mean, this is why my one in the chamber for people who harass me, as always. Do you have any real problems, or do you just harass trans women all day? Oh no, I don't say trans women. Because
Yeah.
like why aren't you focusing on your real problems, on like unless it is Elon Musk harassing me, and I believe that he doesn't have any real problems. But like if it was Elon Musk harassing me, I would just point and say, Lamau, you're literally Elon Musk, and everyone else would point and laugh too. So it'd be fine.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's one of those things where it's hard to quell the anger and just put your hand on somebody's shoulder and say, "Are you okay?
Yeah, buddy, are you
Are
you doing all right?
that funny?
Have you slept enough? Yeah. Are you breathing good air? Are you drinking clean water? Are you eating well?
I did reply to a troll like that once, because I saw a thing that it's like a New Zealand journalist, David Farrier, had written about like his new thing was just to be really nice to people that were, you know, trying to troll him, and how successful it had been, and just the people being like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." And I tried it once. This guy sent me this huge like hateful message. I can't even remember what it was about. And I just sent this message back being like, "Oh, hey, sorry, man, but you know, that's just my opinion on a couple things. I'm sorry that you disagreed with it, but you know," just like this really chill message. And then months later, I got this message back from him being like, "Hey, look, sorry, dude. I was having a really rough time, and I was really upset." And it was like hilarious. And I sent it back, and I was just like, "Oh man, I'm glad to hear you're doing better. You know, like hopefully you put that behind you." So it was just like so funny, like messages I thought I would never receive, and here we go.
To add something to this in a kind of bizarre way, as a sex worker, I receive oftentimes like, I mean, I get a lot of DMs, but sometimes I get a surprising number of DMs where men are just like want to talk to me and like want to feel like less alone. Like they just want to have companionship of some kind. And like, I think there's lots of different ways we can evaluate that. But the way that's sticking out to me right now is like what you're talking about, Tim, this like how so much of this hateful rhetoric and this hateful posturing, if you chip it away, can just come down to like bleak alienation and this very bleak loneliness and feeling of no purpose, feeling like no community. That, and like it's quite depressing. Like it's kind of funny. Your story legitimately is like funny, but also I think there's a bigger picture to think about here.
Which is why people whose wrongheadedness and alienatedness and so on are not our true enemy. The true enemy is people making them like that and then exploiting them being like that.
Right. Yeah. And they're suffering as much or maybe more, right? Because they're stuck like that. And yeah.
They also can't see their own liberation because they're also trapped in the neoliberal mind prison. You know?
For sure. But yeah, the what you bring up about people being lonely and touch starved, you know, the notion that most of humanity has been divided and conquered, and we've been alienated from our humanity, and the notion of wanting affection and wanting to be together with people is so disallowed that there's such a short swath of what's acceptable in terms of those sorts of things, and in terms of giving or receiving it. And yeah, I mean,
the idea of someone being there was a point in human history at which the idea of a human being touch starved was very rare, very, very strange. Like the idea that people couldn't have access to affection from other human beings by their just normal social relations, you know, didn't exist at some point.
Yeah, and I mean, and circling back to sex work, the earliest sex work was a sacred thing. It was done by the priesthood because it was the most important work there was for making sure that people felt cared for. You carry on a wonderful tradition, you know, of taking care of people in the most fundamental way.
Yeah, I have a bit of a reference to this in the tattoo I mentioned getting last week, the public universal girlfriend tramp stamp. It's like I want to, express my sexual liberation in a way that's also like reminding us that, like, being like slutty or whatever is not a moral lack of virtue and all this stuff. It's actually like being available for affection with like people that you care about, like a good thing. Like,
right on. Yes, I second that. Which font did you choose?
I went with a sort of round, bubble-ish kind of post-psychedelia kind of look. It's got a little 3D shimmer on it.
Nice.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, very based.
A picture of it is available on my Twitter.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
You'll find it if you'll scroll back far enough. But yeah, no. Yeah, I think, speaking of tattoos and stuff, I think like the bodily autonomy thing is interesting because it does pop up occasionally in like, like the body modification and like industries, more so than like tattooing, but like in the kind of extreme kind of, the things that are kind of a bit further beyond piercing sort of thing. Like things like pointing ears, splitting tongues, implants under the skin and stuff. That's actually when I was back at the shop doing my piercing apprenticeship, we did I was apprenticing under the guy that was like pretty much the only person in New Zealand that would do like subdermal and transdermal implants. So we would do everything from like, I think he was in a tech magazine for being like one of the first people to implant an RFID chip and things like this. This was like in the early 2000s. And but then we'd do other things as well. Like people would get little weird silicone things under their skin and their forehead, or like like the other one is like genital beading was like more popular than most people would suspect. But yeah, and like this kind of thing would pop up occasionally as well, because it would be there's procedures that people will do, and it's basically the kind of thing where it's like you can't even get someone to do a waiver for it, because then you're acknowledging that you're doing something that is is bad. And it's kind of like you just have to do this thing and be like, okay, well, I'm like, don't, like, I'm going to do this thing to the best of my ability. We both agree that we understand the risks and stuff, but like, I can't get you to write down a thing saying like, yes, I understand that, climbing in the submarine is probably going to result in my death or whatever. But, yeah, so there was like, people would come up with like, like different things. Like there was like one guy that would have like a little like a little dictaphone, and he'd be like, okay, I'm gonna record this thing of us both agreeing we both know what's up. You've had the opportunity to ask any questions and stuff, and then I'm just gonna put this little tape in it safe, and I'm gonna hold on to it, in case it ever comes up. But yeah, I've heard of practitioners going to jail. Fortunately, the only one I've heard of that really seriously went to jail was also just a real pretty dodgy practitioner in general. So it's kind of like, no big loss to the community in my eyes. But
yeah, I didn't know you were big into body mods. Do you know about the peg leg project that I did?
The pig leg? No, I don't think so. What's up with that?
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't want to divert the conversation too far, but Wired magazine did a good article about it. Oh, but I made a pirate file server that I got implanted in my leg, and I made out of counterfeit electronics, sort of a Johnny Mnemonic thing. It was fun. It was fun. It didn't get a lot of traction. People didn't seem to care, but it was one of these things where it was like, okay, the internet's broken. How do we make new internet? Okay, we need mesh networks. Okay, how do we build mesh networks? Well, we need file servers that are local area networks that don't connect to the internet, and those need to mesh with other things. And all right, how do we make it so that those can cross international borders without getting seized? Well,
obviously.
Yeah. So that's what I did one day.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I feel like ideologically there is like a intersection there. Like a lot of the people that I have known that have been really into you know, kind of more extreme body modifications, like, you know, like really kind of like adjacent to kind of like hacker communities and things
Yeah.
like that. Like there's like a significant crossover there. But
Yeah,
yeah, no, I
we
always found that
presented
interesting.
at DEF CON. It was in
Oh
the
yeah,
biohacking village. So that talk should be online somewhere. Yeah.
cool.
Well, here, let me throw a question out. Of the myriad health crises that face the world currently, what would you put? You don't have to say this is your number one, but if you would pick one that's at least in your top 5 or 10, what's the first one that comes to mind?
I mean, for me, it would just be like homelessness. It would be like yeah, like I often think the warning story is about like AI will do this. It's always like, well, what task are you putting it to? If you're putting it to a capitalist task, yeah, it'll probably kill everyone. But like, if its task was to improve health outcomes, one of the first things it would do would be like, well, everyone needs to be fucking housed, number one.
Hmm.
Housing first, definitely. That is, yeah.
And probably linked to that, one of my big things, which I consider like a public health crisis and, you know, like a mental health crisis, but I know that a lot of people don't really perceive it that way, is probably mass incarceration.
Oh,
Particularly
yeah.
like, yeah, like Maori are one of the most like disproportionately
Tim's taking my thing one step further. He's like, no, it's people being in the building against their will. That's the problem. I'm like, shit, he got me.
the people that don't have the building and the people that can't leave the building. These are the problems. But
Yeah.
yeah, that would be mine. I think that it's like I think that talking about prison abolition like ties in very easily to a lot of other things in ways that people don't realize. So yeah, that would be my big one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I taught math in prisons for many years, and the
Hmm.
things that you see with people's health are really scary. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. We've had some prison riots down here recently, and it's like, you know, like they end up, there was like one recently where they started a fire inside the prison, and
Mm.
you know, but basically had it was like a strike, I would say, you know, like a prisoner's strike sort of thing, because um they didn't have, oh, there was so much stuff they didn't have. They were basically like living in squalor. They weren't having their basic needs met against the law, you know, like it was illegal to be keeping them in the condition that they were in, and they had complained through all the available, like all of the proper channels they had exhausted, and it's like, this is what, you know, this is what you have to do, like to get their attention or whatever. And you know, then it gets on the news, and it's like, you know, all these like wild prisoners are burning down the prison that they're in because they're, you know, like treating them like animals or whatever. And, you know, like people, like all these like shock jock kind of like TV journalists are all like, well, you know, why didn't they just let people know that they didn't have working toilets, or they weren't being fed, or like some of them were, you know, like had preventable illnesses. And it's like, if you actually take 5 minutes to look at it, it's, you know, like they've been doing this for months and months. They've been campaigning and all this kind of stuff. And I think just the way that people think about prisoners has a lot to do with this. Like they assume that the first thing they assume is just that they are, you know, basically animals or whatever. And then afterwards they think like, oh, okay, maybe there's another reason. But yeah, anyways, wait, sorry. Mule or Kira, do you have an answer?
I just have to say that I am a published epidemiologist. So asking me like, what's the biggest public health crisis?
I don't have to say biggest, but just like, what's the one that resonates with you the most emotionally?
Oh God. Okay, that's a different question. Okay, Mule, you go. I'll think about it.
Okay. So like I guess I get most of my medical based ideas from Cuba. Cuba seemed to be pretty good about you know, doing a lot of good medical work all over the world, and one of the biggest things seems to be like vaccine development and distribution across the imperial periphery. Particularly in Africa, there are like lots of countries in Africa that you know, still don't have COVID vaccine, but not just the COVID vaccine, like various other vaccines, and you know, they're gate kept and sort of like held you know, under lock by big pharma and stuff like that. So I definitely think like vaccine distribution all across the imperial periphery is something I think about a lot. Yeah.
All right, my answer is it's nutrition, but also not just nutrition, but also the intersection of nutrition with our exploitation of our non-human animal comrades, because very little attention is ever paid to our non-human animal comrades and like their plight and how they are being both the products of exploitation and the laborers and the products of their own exploitation. And then also the consumers of that, which, by the way, it's not just solely animal products that are consumed that cause poor health and like that entire disgusting industry, but it's also, it goes far larger than that. I don't want to reduce nutritional issues just to that, because that's just not fair. But I would say personally, as because I'm vegan, and so emotionally, just seeing like the issues that poor nutrition, both education and access is like so frustrating. Like, because you were talking about earlier, like it's not like this food isn't there. It's not like we don't have it. It's like it's there. It exists. We can easily make more of it too if we just changed a few things. But that would require some people to lose lots of money, and we can't have that.
Since you guys are readers, there's another book called Big Hunger that is sort of the nonprofit industrial complex looking at food scarcity. And when you see most of the big donors have the people who utilize those services, they are their own employees, which is pretty horrifying.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is basically Walmart basically having like access, like a sign up area for SNAP, where you sign up for food stamps at Walmart as an employee because Walmart refuses to pay you a livable wage. So they make it very accessible to just sign up for the government to subsidize your food through a program that, by the way, keeps getting chipped away. So it's even less and less access and less funding for it. So
if we're going to be specific like that, and the big one is Safeway. Safeway is like this incredible donor and creates all of these food drives, and most of the people who utilize them as a food bank are the people who work for them, which is so backward.
Yeah.
It's despicable. And it literally means, beyond the subsidies that these companies already provided by us, literally means even more. This is even an indirect subsidy, but it is a subsidy because otherwise workers would die. They would not be able to live on those wages. And many of them are, for the record. So access to access to good nutrition, but also the way that it intersects with the exploitation of our non-human animal comrades.
Will you say a little bit more about your work in epidemiology? What sorts of things?
So I used to work in infectious disease epidemiology, focusing on immunocompromised patients, specifically like hematopoietic cell transplant recipients. Yeah. And so we would study just like we were talking about earlier, like many hospital-borne infections, but not necessarily. Right. But a lot of my work was in tracking like hospital-borne infections, like Clostridium difficile, or things like that. And so, or norovirus. And so oftentimes it would be like a larger study, but sometimes it'd be a smaller one. Like we would get down to like the literal rooms and like figure out the actual like poor custodian work that would lead to an infection. For instance, there was patients that were staying in these facilities that were funded by like Ronald McDonald, whatever. Anyways, thank you, McDonald's, but they're not paying for any custodians. So the custodian work had to be done by the people that were staying in those facilities while their loved ones were getting care at the nearby hospital. Wow. Because of this, and because also they were not provided like bleach to clean up after themselves.
Probably training either, right?
Yeah, no training, not adequate cleaning supplies, illnesses like Clostridium difficile, which is not fatal to most people, but can be fatal to immunocompromised patients. Was a problem, and because their loved ones it was being spread at the facilities and also being spread to the patients. And so that was kind of like a little bit of my work. I also did some work prior to that outside of epidemiology, but epidemiology was that was more like lab technician, but as like a first author and stuff, this was my work.
Yeah, I love it how when COVID first kicked off as well, and you started talking about stuff, people were like, well, stick to streaming, like, what do you know? It's like, actually
Actually.
I got the same treatment. I got the same treatment right at the end of 2019. I was like, this is terrifying and we should be paying close attention. Everybody's like, you're always freaking out about infectious disease. And I was like, and somebody's like, hey, look at it. It's only like 3% lethal. I'm like, so are we going to call it less lethal, like rubber bullets? And that tweet is still up somewhere. I don't know quite when it was dated. It might have been early 2020. It might have been as late as like February, but I was freaking out. But infectious disease and hospital-borne stuff like that is something I don't want to say dear to my heart, but it's something I think about a lot. And I'll tell you, I used to have hair longer than yours, and then I caught MRSA. And I nearly didn't survive it twice. And now, DJ and I share a hairdo instead.
That's what's really frustrating about that, because so much MRSA is acquired in hospitals or healthcare facilities, and like healthcare practitioners, goes back to what you're talking about, like custodial work. Healthcare practitioners have this issue, like doctors specifically, not exclusively, but doctors really specifically, and I think it's kind of the hubris of being a doctor, just don't practice hand hygiene regularly. Like you'll have the whole pump in, pump out policy for a lot of hospitals for when it comes to hand sanitizers or like wash your hands. They won't participate in those activities. So much so that these facilities have to like put things all over the place and even insist that patients ask your practitioner, did you wash your hands before you talk to me? And by the way, may I tell you that if you do ask them that question, they get very upset, very offended.
That should not be required. I do that when I come into a house.
Me too.
We had doctors and nurses come through the tattoo shop sometimes, and just like they, like I mean, most of them are fine, but the people that have been really bad have often been from that kind of medical background, and they'll come in and they'll start like, you'll have a aseptic kind of setup with your machine and all your equipment and everything like that, and then people will like come along and just and it's always doctors and nurses will start picking things up and being like, oh, what is this? And it's like, what are you doing?
It's this,
you should know better. You should know
the way these things are laid out and everything, the way that I've only touched things with gloves, all this kind of stuff, like it's just obvious even if you didn't know. It's
Don't
like,
you see this sterile drape? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like everything's laid out on like a dental bib and everything like that, and they're just like getting amongst it. But
oh god, I have so many stories of like poor sterile technique that were from PhDs and not the technicians. Like I can't even, it's revolting for the record. But yes, like this, it's a weird, bizarre phenomenon that like the higher you go up in terms of like your status in a particular like fields like in healthcare and science, oftentimes the more arrogant you, like the kind of like ownership you feel of like these topics, and like no longer do I have to bother myself with like caring about these smaller things because I've been in this field for 20 years. I must therefore be immune to having to practice these like more rigorous, seemingly like lower than me.
Yeah, but no.
Yeah, if you just get the upgrade so that you're always sterile at all times.
Right.
One of our chat regulars, Biddle Marxist, actually relating to this, said in the chat to answer Michael's like question to all of us, IMO, the very nature of teaching medicine, especially for doctors, is based on a capitalist exhaustive model that destroys more potential health workers rather than creating new ones. Doctors' hours alone are something no doctor would recommend any human endure. And yet, to which I said that they should read Medical Nemesis from Michael's reading list, because that's exactly a huge point of that.
Well, and if you'd like a slightly different and shorter in volume and fewer in notes introduction to that notion, the same author, Ivan Illich, wrote 2 books, one of which is called Tools for Conviviality, and the other is called Towards a towards a something of needs, it was an idea of trying to put together a sort of, this Tolstoyan idea of like, well, what is really required for life. And I can't remember which of those it is, but one of them opens with a chapter or an introduction called Two Watersheds.
Toward a History of Needs.
Toward a History of Needs, that's what it was. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so Toward a History of Needs, it opens with this section called Two Watersheds, and it talks about the point in history somewhere in the early 20s where Western medicine had better than a coin flip's worth of odds of making you better. Or it was either better than a coin flip or that it was working better than his estimation of folk medicine. Folk medicine was probably doing a whole lot better most of the time. And then a point in further, somewhere in the mid to late 50s, where the number of ailments caused by the medical infrastructure outpaced the number of ailments that could be treated by the medical infrastructure. Mm. And that's sort of a starting point if you don't want to read a really thick, heavy, very, very academic book where sometimes the footnotes are more than the body text in a given page. If that's not the sort of thing that really gets you going,
if you don't read like I read, basically,
yeah. But that's a good introduction, and if that gets you going, then pick up medical nemesis maybe, because medical nemesis is it's heavy. It is a heavy, very dense, which is awesome if you like that. Yeah. So what other questions do we have trickling in?
Yeah, we actually should probably get to the
it is about time.
Questions.
So chat, we're going to be reading questions from the chat. First one is from Morgan the Fae, and she has asked, wasn't there an analysis recently that in the last year since Roe was overturned, the amount of abortions hasn't changed all that much? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will not correct you.
That makes sense. I don't know the analysis myself, but like I wouldn't be surprised by that in the slightest.
The data is not good also because plenty of abortions don't get recorded. Access has gone down, and so there are plenty of people who needed them and did not get them in many cases, resulting in tragedy in varying numbers of ways. But that said, the people who fight the good fight underground and distribute access to abortions in ways that are extra legal, as I like to call it, or circumlegal, or both, they have really risen to the occasion and done the good work that was needed in most cases. The hard part really being that oftentimes when somebody needs that sort of care, they don't know where to look to get it. It's sort of this last mile problem of if you're already linked into the underground, you're not the person that we need to get in touch with to say like, hey, you have options. There are people who can help you out. There are people who will, drive you to a neighboring state. There are organizations which will put up the money. There are groups that will mail you pills.
Because it's like people know that the trans community is fairly radical. So when you're talking about the struggle for bodily autonomy there, it's one thing, but like the biggest demographic of people who have abortions is mothers, like, and they're not necessarily plugged into everything we're talking about.
Yeah. That was absolutely something that is mentioned quite a lot in A Woman's Book of Choices about how it's not, like there is this idea of the woman who gets an abortion or whatever like that, but it's like it's literally everyone from all walks of life, including there's a big section that talks about women that are opposed to abortions that still get them anyway, and all this kind of stuff. But just the majority of the cases are just like, oh, this is a woman who had, you know, like she had a promotion at work coming up and she wasn't necessarily opposed to having another child. It just wasn't the right time, you know, or like, oh, like just on the current income that she was on, or like, you know, being single, it just wasn't the right time. And it's like just normal mothers with kids and families.
If you look at the statistics that come out of the Guttmacher Institute, they do a very good job of cataloging that sort of demographic information. And the thing that everything that you indicate is totally true. And one of the things that seems so strange in the sort of abortion fight is these people who are anti-abortion. They and their wives and their daughters and their mistresses and will all get all the abortions they ever need. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
They feel like they fall into a separate category because they, you know, we're just flying to Switzerland for the weekend. It's no big deal.
Yeah, flying to Switzerland or Ireland, or, you know, there's a couple other places. And that's the thing, right? And they talk about that a lot. They have, I mean, it's all kind of anecdotal, but they have accounts in the book of people that they, you know, there was even there was some clinic workers that recognized the people that were picketing their clinics coming in, you know, and like,
oh my God.
or like things like this, or, you know, like the wives and daughters of, you know, famous figures that were, you know, had spoken out, and they gave them, you know, they helped them, they did everything they can for them. And in some of the cases, there was one clinic I remember mentioned where they collected the details of people, like, well, so they did like a consent form, and then it said like, you know, do you agree with abortion, you know, like all these kind of things, asked them about their political views on it. They collected the details of them, and they said that you know, like a lot of these people are like very well known people, or like related to people in this community or whatever like that. They just don't see themselves as the person that gets the abortion. They have like a, you know, personal kind of perspective that is at odds with their policy. So for them, you know, they would come into the waiting room and they would sit separate from all the others, and they would judge them or whatever like that. And they're like, I'm not like these people. I'm a, you know, like I'm a good person forced to make a hard decision, whereas these people are just, you know, like these are the abortion habits or whatever. So it's like, yeah, it's pretty interesting. But I did find there was a chapter in it about, like, the chapter that's about the legality and things, and it's like about kind of, you know, abortions or other forms of pregnancy termination or whatever as civil disobedience. I found really interesting because you know, there are forms of civil disobedience that are protected under law in some ways, or like, you know, like it's a different legal scenario when it's like you are just committing a crime because you are doing something illegal or whatever for personal gain, whatever, or civil disobedience where it's a political thing where you're like, I am breaking the law because I believe it is unjust, you know. And like, you know, that how there was like, there is an actual distinction from this, and it can help you in court for certain ways or whatever. So it's kind of
and beyond the law, right, that differentiation ideologically has quite the storied history. And if you read what Ulrike Meinhof wrote for the RAF, when she said, you burn a single car, it's a crime. If you burn 100 cars, it's a political action. You throw a single rock, and that's a crime. If a crowd throws 100 rocks, it's a political action. And some of the ideas that came out of that, it's interesting to get into the weeds on that.
Yeah. But
before we get to the next question, I have to ask, is that a Queen Alexandra's bird wing that is in the shadow box behind you? Or is
let me see. I'm not sure. I'll take a little look.
That's just a rare.
He does not even know. He's a poser. He just got that because he thought it'd make him look cool. Christ,
It looks
who
cool.
is our co-host?
It was a gift, actually. So it's not a Queen Alexandra's birdwing, but it's a Raja Brooks birdwing. I don't know if that might even be the same thing, but
no, it's not. It's not. It's a different.
Okay. I was gonna say maybe the Raja is just, you know, like the Indian one. This was from Malaysia, so yeah, you know, different names. Anyway, Cool. So then we got another question. What do we got here? So La Magi de la V has asked us, got a question on the medical freedom front. Should there be public organizations dedicated to conducting replication trials on pharmaceutical drugs? And if so, how should such trials be paid for? Ooh, this is interesting.
Wow. Well, top marks for sophistication on that one. Yeah. So there's sort of some antecedent things that one needs to at least ask, if not answer, in terms of looking at the trials that are done for approving a medication. If you think about that first, that system is already highly flawed, which I guess is sort of what the question references, is that shouldn't those be replicated to make sure? I mean, the answer is yes, but first, that the approval structure, if one believes in the whole system of approval of drugs in the first place, which ironically was an institution that was set up to try and keep the public safer from predatory capitalists, and yet has now just become a tool of predatory capitalism, bizarrely. So that there are a number of things wrong that we could spend another 2 hours talking about just with the drug approval process. But a few that are notable that are not talked about a great deal is that oftentimes drugs will not be approved, which would be useful in a medical context, not because the drugs do not work, but because the drugs do not outperform the existing medications. And this is a really big deal because it means that there are fewer tools in the toolbox for a medical practitioner to reach for. And these technologies just sit on the shelf. Other times things are not approved because they work very well, but not for the plurality of cases. So you might have something that is a miracle cure, but only for a fifth of the participants. And because it doesn't work for most of them, then it doesn't pass. And then, so the sort of converse problem that's being brought up by your viewer is that sometimes things are approved when perhaps they shouldn't be. One of the antecedent problems there is that you just need to have a trial that works once. And you don't even need to publish the results of all the failed trials once you have one that works. So that's an antecedent problem as well. That said, in terms of then looking at, so for your viewers who don't know, the process for approving drugs in the United States is very similar to most first world countries, and most countries in general, in fact, where what will happen is that first you test to see if it's toxic on its own. You need to make sure that it's not something that causes horrific dangers. Then the second phase of the trial says, does it have any therapeutic effects at all? And then once that's established, the third phase of trials is to show that it works better than the existing go-to treatment. So assuming you manage to do each of those one time and it works, then your drug gets pushed through. So then to revisit something to say, is this actually as safe as we thought, is definitely worth doing. In fact, the way ideally it would work is that you would have data on everybody who takes the drug subsequently, And oftentimes, I mean, and of course, the danger there is the way that people collect data and anonymity and so on. But assuming you could solve that problem in a realistic way, the best way to bake that in is to merely have every prescription that's given for a prescription drug to carry with it a necessary follow-up from the physician to see how the patient fared under those conditions. And that would do wonders to determine if there are concerns that are invisible. And and in plenty of cases, that data is recorded, but it's not fed back up the chain, and it doesn't lead to any decision-making processes. And often it's shrouded data within an institution and is not even shared with other medical practitioners. An example of this that's very personal for me is the first generation selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that were hailed as this miracle cure for depression, which also led to untold numbers of suicides, which seems rather contradictory because first-gen SSRIs, Prozac, etc., continue to create suicidal ideation in people who previously didn't have it. And there are theories to the mechanism of that. Oftentimes, it's that you have people who are both depressed and exhausted because of their depression, and when you give them something that gives them the energy to do things but has not yet taken the 2 requisite weeks to kick in so that their serotonin balance has made them less depressed, then they have the energy to actually act on all of their thoughts. And I have several friends personally who are dead because of that, and untold others. And it's because, I mean, eventually studies were done to point this out, but it's done nothing to regulate the prescription or even to moderate the way, the fierce pace with which antidepressants are prescribed, both to people who are chronically depressed for neurochemical reasons and people who are situationally depressed and don't need medication but need care instead, who also often end up suicidal because they don't need their brain fucked with. They need to be thinking about what's wrong in their life. So the answer to that is that every drug should continuously be on trial, and data needs to be collected perpetually for as much as possible, and of course, safely, anonymously, ethically, and that system needs to be in a continuous rolling process. And who should pay for that? The fucking drug companies.
Yeah, there's also, like, in the, I guess, discussion of the centralization and standardization of these kinds of bodies for testing, like, there are obvious, like, implicit bias problems and problems for marginalized communities.
Oh, yeah. Again, we can do another 2 hours on that.
Yeah, to continually make everything about myself again. With DIY HRT, like, when we were researching, we did come across a group in Paris who, like, not only, like, do harm reduction stuff and teach people how to safely use injectable estrogen, but also, like, have access to a lab, so they're running their own studies that cis people simply aren't doing because they don't care to do the same kind of studies into the best way for someone to implement HRT.
Yeah. Cool. What else we got?
We got a cat made entirely of urine has asked, what books are on the reading list? And I have the list here. It is Medical Nemesis by Ivan Illich, A Woman's Book of Choices by Carol Downer and Rebecca Chalker, Information Feudalism by John Braithwaite and Peter Drahos, and The Crime of Reason by Robert B. Laughlin. But then a follow-up to that is that Mr. Noobster asked, what reading level are the books on the list?
I would say The Crime of Reason is very accessible. I think it was ghostwritten. The guy who's the author is, I think he won the Nobel Prize in Physics. But clearly there was a professional writer who wrote with great intention to make it accessible. So it's a fairly easy read. It's fairly short. It is still well annotated in terms of the citations. So when you see something that sounds suspect, you can flip to the end and see where they got that information. And I checked almost every reference in that book because so many things that he claims are suspect, and sometimes he views it in a way that's a little slanted, but he's not bullshitting per se. Then, as I mentioned, Medical Nemesis is a heavy read. That's definitely a text for when you've turned your phone off and you're home alone and you've already fed the cat and you can really focus on the text. So that's a heavy read. A Woman's Book of Choices is a mixed bag. They kind of go back and forth. There are sections which are just transcripts of experiences that people had and people talking. Sometimes it's very conversational, and then other times it gets very technical where they are talking about questions of how does infection spread and how do reproductive systems work and how do we manipulate them so that they operate the way we'd like them to. But that also is much more of a reference book that you would read in sections rather than read it all the way through, probably. Did we have a fourth one? Oh, Information Feudalism. Information Feudalism. That one's pretty academic, I gotta say. It's a little academically constipated, for lack of a better word. They come at it from this very technical standpoint, and while they do make it concrete from time to time, oftentimes they are talking about things that are fairly abstract in terms of international law and economics that can get a bit dry. So that's the sort of book that's good to read standing up.
Yeah. I did appreciate with the Woman's Book of Choices, it was very much written in a way that was like, you could just give this to anyone and this would be a good resource for them. It's like, it's super accessible, and if it brings up like something that it's mentioned in the book, it explains a couple things a couple times over, because they'll talk about one thing in one section, and then if it comes up later, like in there's like sections where it's actually explaining like this is the process, and it mentions something, it'll explain that thing again, like a little bit briefer.
And again, the reason that things are explained more than once is because it's designed to be modular. So you can, if you see it,
exactly,
you want to read about one thing, it's not that you've read everything up until that. So you can use it very much as a reference book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's great. Yeah, and it's like it was designed by women that were like frustrated with the inaccessibility of a lot of medical information, and that was part of the goal, was to be able to get it into the hands of people that hadn't been to medical school or anything like that. So
and again, they did a great job and still relevant today.
It's amazing.
Good that it's there, and it's sad that it's needed.
Yeah, they had a lawyer that was quite skeptical working with them, and so he was very good in like probing a lot of their stuff and being like, well, what about this, and it actually like really I think made the book a lot stronger. Like you can kind of tell when this was like the probing finger of the lawyer that was like getting in there.
Right.
Yeah, great book. Got one more question.
Just Johnny has asked, how could we help with the problems with superbugs and antibiotic resistances?
We have to define we, like humanity.
Yeah, I have to assume it's not like a state level question.
Okay, I mean, if we say humanity, the quick answer is bacteriophages. Bacteriophages are this miraculous technology that was standard practice in the USSR for decades. And what bacteriophages are, for those who are unfamiliar, is they are viruses that infect and kill specific bacteria. And this is way more effective than the chemical sledgehammers that we use in the West of antibiotics, and they don't develop resistance. And it's a scalpel instead of a cudgel, and it's not really studied anymore. Like, you can go to the country of Georgia, and there is one lab there that has an incredible library of bacteriophages, and basically that needs to become standard practice. Those libraries need to be categorized, expanded, shared, propagated, and that needs to be a standard tool in the toolbox of every library. In that library needs to be in every hospital in the world, and the problem of superbugs will diminish significantly. That's the first one. The other thing is that bed rails need to be made of copper, because even things as nasty as MRSA will die on the surface of copper in 70 minutes. They're just as easy to clean as steel. It's more expensive, but only in the short term, because think of what you have to spend when you're containing a superbug. You know, and copper's pretty. We should make everything out of copper, and doorknobs and common touch points, light switches. I mein, not just because I like it personally, but I do. But you know, things like that. There are materials that are endogenously resistant to microbes, and if instead of making elevator buttons and light switches out of plastic, we had nice engraved copper, it wouldn't just be prettier, but it would also be prettier. But it would also be safer. And yeah, so those would be the top two in my mind. We need to utilize and normalize the use of bacteriophages, and we need to have surfaces that are naturally bacteria resistant. And you know, like Kira said, fucking wash your hands when you come into a house. It's like a really simple thing. If you want to do this on an individual level, like, get yourself a little bottle of chlorhexidine, and there are formulations of chlorhexidine that have like things that are good for your skin, so you won't dry out and crack. And just use it a lot, and you know, you will get sick less often, and you will make other people sick less often, even unwittingly. But yes, read about and tell everybody about bacteriophages. It's one of those things where once you learn about it, you will freak out, and all of your friends will ask if you would please just talk about anything else.
It is interesting. Like, I've never heard of that. Like, I've heard of, like, I guess similar things in like science fiction and stuff, but being a known Soviet enjoyer, I'm surprised I've never heard of this. So I'm definitely gonna look it.
I feel I'm being confirmed as a greater Soviet enjoyer than Tim.
Oh, busted! Fake Soviet.
Soviet fan.
Big old phony over here.
Greatest thing to come out of the Soviet Union, the bacteriophages, and they did a great job. Also, for anybody out there who's a burgeoning biologist who needs a field of study, please do not let this knowledge die out. There are so few people studying it, and it is the most powerful tool that is not being used right now.
I feel like there's probably some out there in our audience. We've had, it's been surprising how many people pop into the chat and they're just surprisingly like studying or already an expert in some subject, you know. It's we have a pretty good crowd. But yeah,
Speaking of
Cool.
the crowd, what about that homework? What are our thoughts on giving
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
our audience homework?
Is there anything you can think of that would be a good just it doesn't have to be anything major, but just something good that people could like in the past we've had things everything from like reading particular books to like
Getting a first
joining a
aid kit.
union. Yeah,
Getting a
learning
first
how to
aid
use a
kit.
first aid kit. Yeah.
Walk around in your neighborhood and imagine how it would look different in your ideal world.
Yeah. You got any good ideas for what we could give them?
Yeah, well, so I have sort of a something I say a lot that's more Four Thieves specific, where I say if you believe in what Four Thieves is doing, you'd like to support us specifically. The best way that you can do it is to find somebody that needs your help and to help them, whether you think they deserve it or not. So that's a starter. But if for something that's maybe a little more specific, there's a region of the brain called the hippocampus, and it's named so because it vaguely resembles a seahorse. And there are two conditions under which the hippocampus atrophies. The first one is chronic depression, and the second one is a lack of situational navigation. So if you constantly use turn-by-turn directions on your phone, rather than being aware of where you are and navigating by landmarks.
Oh God, you're describing me. Oh God. Okay, keep going.
No, there's good news. There's a way to reverse it. This is the great thing.
Okay.
So so for the two of you who are in the UK, if you think about London and the black cabs and the knowledge exam that they have to take, black cab drivers have to memorize all of London, not just all of London, but the one-way system through all of London, so they can actually plot the most efficient route between any 2 points in what is a absolutely sprawlingly gigantic city.
Yeah.
If you look at the brains of these people, they have huge hippocampi. And interestingly enough, so the size of the hippocampus can be modulated in both directions. So if you have a friend who is depressed, here is a good thing that you can do for them. Set up an exercise where they are going to direct you without using instructions from a computer from wherever they live to some other point. You make sure that you are with them, and if they are the sort of people who are phobic about being without their phone, you don't have to take it away. You can just turn GPS off. If they want to use the map on their phone, that is still a useful thing. If they're good enough that you can take their phone away, give them a paper map and it'll be even better. But they can use a digital map. There's nothing wrong with that. But the idea that they will guide you and they'll never be without you, and if they freak out, you can go home and stop at any time, remind them that they're safe. Say, before you leave the house, we're going to pick a spot that we're going to go. You're going to direct me, and I'll be with you the whole time. And anytime that things feel too scary, we can stop and go straight home, and you can turn GPS back on, use turn-by-turn directions if you need to. Don't worry. But that little exercise will start the process of reversing the hippocampal atrophy. And if they're amicable to that, help them through it, and then try and do it a little more, and then maybe do it in a place where you haven't been before. And if that's too much, if somebody's having the all bodies because of going outside without having help, start with something even more basic. Sit down with a open world video game that they haven't played before and just have them navigate around the space. They don't have to play it. They just are walking around, and just have them figure out where they are.
This reminds me of playing Morrowind as a kid, where you would have the printed out map because the map in the game wasn't really the same. And like me and my brothers would be like, navigating, like looking, okay, there's a mountain to the west. All right, where are we on the map? Like,
yeah.
I like this homework a lot. I will actually be doing this week.
Yeah, no, it sounds
so yeah, and everybody has friends who are struggling with depression. It's far more common than we all would like to give it credit for. But find somebody who's having some trouble and just suggest it. Say, if you'd like to do this, I will do it with you. That's your homework.
All right.
I'm down. I'm doing it. I'm all over it.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. Yeah.
And so for you four, I expect you four to report back and let me know how it went.
All right,
Okay,
cool.
okay, we'll do.
Now I will
Hopefully we
not
don't
do
get
it.
too lost then.
Well, last thing then, Michael, anything that you want to plug quickly before you head off?
Yeah, be nice to each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. This has been great.
Yeah. And people who are out there, if you'd like to be part of Four Thieves, we're not hard to find. We're online. Poke around. Four Thieves Vinegar Collective .org. You can find me on Twitter and all the usual places. But if you want to come give me a howdy or say howdy to the other people in the collective, don't hesitate to do so.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well,
Cool.
it was
Awesome.
great to
Thanks.
meet you.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great. And if any of y'all want to get in touch, I do go to the UK and New Zealand and even the so-called United States.
Cool. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks again. Great chatting.
Bye.
Bye.
Last things to do. We need to discuss the Patreon again in more depth this time. Mule, you started telling us all about the Patreon before. Why don't you tell us all about just one of the tiers this time, the Sprite mode?
Oh, that's right, Sophie. And while I will do that, and I'm not stalling for time because I don't have that ready. It's Sprite mode.
Put it in the bookmark bar.
And the Sprite mode, there it is. The Sprite mode. Get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. It's only $2 a month, £2 in the UK, and in Aotearoan dollars it is $3, right? $3.50.
Close. Yeah.
Close. And yeah, you get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. Benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you're helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to Red Planet Discord. That's it. What's next, Sophie?
What's next after Sprite mode? Well, that's Goblin mode. And I like to talk slowly sometimes and also type things into my browser.
It's
and the
cool
reason
and
for
fun
that
to do.
is because I am a Goblin enjoyer. So if you become a Goblin by getting Goblin mode going on, which would cost you £8.50 a month, I believe $10 a month, 19 New Zealand dollars a month,
$17.50.
Okay. Then I would be enjoying you because you would be in Goblin mode. Everyone loves a Goblin. We all get a little Goblin mode from time to time. Complete your Gobology by going Goblin mode with everything that Mule already mentioned, as well as a pack of cool Red Planet stickers and access to exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts. We are doing a Star Trek Red Planet Discord hangout soon. Tim and I tried to do one, but we announced it way too late, so only 2 people showed up. They are officially the biggest Red Planet fans in the whole world. But we will announce it better so more people can show up. We'll be watching Darmok from TNG and probably From Beyond the Stars, or Far Beyond the Stars from DS9 for now. But I think Kira and I will also plan some more DS9 watching in a bit. Speaking of Kira, what's after Goblin mode?
Oh my God. It's beast mode. Holy shit. Are you actually going to go beast mode? Well, then we can offer you all the stuff in the lower tiers and pin badges. Yep, pin badges. Wear your excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It is completely cool and good to do. But what if I want to go even harder? What if I'm kind of like sick, like I'm like a sicko, like what can I do with my money?
Well, if indeed you are a sicko, if you have been sickened adequately, you can jump on over to sicko mode. That it's $200 US,
Oh,
right?
100. 100.
100. Oh, sorry, 100 US, but almost 200 New Zealand. It's 172 New Zealand dollars, plus GST, and something else in Great British pounds. But yeah, so if you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all of the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream, which looks like this. Sorry, I just closed down the window that
looks
has
like this.
JBP and Narrowlawn Starfire. Wow, thank you so much for being sickos. I love what little sickos you are. Ha ha ha, yes, etc.
I knew it was them, but I thought maybe we got lucky and there'd be another. But
Maybe
cool.
next week.
Yeah. That could be
Yeah.
you, chat. That could be you being read out as a lucky sicko. Cool. But yeah, those are the tiers.
Yep.
At the moment, we're trying to get a little bit more so that we can afford to hire an editor to actually kind of be working on clips and things like that, and so we can produce additional content. And yeah, take a little bit of heat off Conrad, who has to do all of the stuff at the moment. But yeah, so if you want to jump on the Patreon, that's what you'll be contributing towards. Yeah, I think that's it for this week, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I have a question though, Tim.
Oh,
where could people find you except for on Red Planet?
If they just can't get enough, they can find me
Understandable.
here. Okay, they can find me here or over on YouTube as Conquest of Dread, or you can find me over on Twitter as Dread Conquest. Yeah, and you can have a lovely time. What about my sweet friend Kira? Where can we find more info about her?
Well, my name is Kira Chats everywhere. So on Twitter, on Twitch, which is my main thing. I stream on Twitch, but I also on my not safe for work scandalous links, which I can't detail any further because of Twitch's terms of service. You can find on my Linktree, linktra.ee/Kira Chats. Also on Blue Sky, I'm Kira Chats, and my Discord, which I'm now like a Discord goblin. It's pathetic. I'm constantly in there. Discord.gg/Kira Chats. We always hang out there and watch stuff, and it's a rootin' tootin' time, let me tell you. So definitely join up. But what if I want to hang out with my friend Mule? Where can I find my friend Mule?
Well, you could just shoot me a message because we're actual friends.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
You could do that.
We are
But
friends.
But what if the chatters want to hang out with you?
they can never do that. You can
But what if they want
never
to see your other content?
Oh yeah, well you just go to linktra.ee/DJ_MUEL. All my stuff is there. Patreon, please give me money. I need it to live. And you get extra content if you're a patron as well. If you go, I have my own Goblin tier, but if you go above that and become an enlightened socialist tier, then you get exclusive Patreon content. For example, I just literally did this week a review, sort of like a bunch of reviews of all the movies I watched in May. Some of these include, I'll just try and reel off these real quick. I listed them the other day. Jabberwocky, Species, X, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure / Bogus Journey, Tetsuo the Iron Man, Partners, Please Baby Please, Poltergeist 3, / Lorette Party, Pink Flamingos, Army of Darkness, 1984, The Whale, and Malignant. So if you want to know what I think about any of those movies or all of them, you could go to patreon.com/DJ Mule, and it will be there in a couple of days. So yeah, that's where you could get me. And next, I want to know about Sophie. Sophie, where are we finding you? Where's that?
Thanks for asking. Oh my god, I just remembered the bass thing I did this week. Now at the end of the I went to a screening called T-Girls on Film. It's a regular event that shows historic trans women in cinema. It was really cool. If you want to find me, you can go to linkter.ee/Sophie from Mars, all one word, especially my Patreon, Money to Live, like Mule said, etc. I'm on YouTube. I make video essays about politics, philosophy, and media. I have something coming out called The World Is Not Ending really soon, really soon. It's a really good time to become a patron of me because I'll be putting up so much content soon. Thanks.
Oh, also,
Awesome.
Is it over?
Huh?
Are we
What?
gone?
What's happening?
Are you asking if we're off? What do you?
We're still live.
Then why are you saying that?
See you next week, everyone.
No, really fast. One more thing.
Okay.
Fundraiser. I forgot to mention my fundraiser is this July 1st on my channel this Saturday.
Oh.
Twitch.tv/Kira Chats. Very, 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 very important. If you want to do direct action for a Black trans man trying to get out deep South and also trying to, is owed immensely for doing plenty of work to help out Gamergate. Please, Twitch.tv/Kira Chats this Saturday. Goodbye.
Saturday.
Now we can leave.
There
You
we
were
go.
your excuse. Your excuse.
Bye.